When I first met my sister-in-law, she didn't seem to like me. She would look me up and down with a harsh stare and laugh quietly to herself. I thought she was probably making fun of my appearance. I felt like I was someone she could easily mock or belittle to feel better about herself. So, when she asked for my help, I said no. I couldn't think of any reason to help her. My name is Maria. I married my husband 3 years ago, and now we live with my in-laws. My father-in-law died when my husband was still in school, so it's just me, my husband, my sister-in-law, Dorothy, and my mother-in-law living together. At first, we didn't plan to live with them. It was just my husband and me. But a year after we got married, my mother-in-law had an accident and hurt her leg. So, we decided to move in to help take care of her. Dorothy was already living at home, but my mother-in-law sadly told my husband that Dorothy was not helpful at all. Dorothy was single and spent her money going out to bars and clubs instead of helping her mother. It would have been nice if she at least helped her mom, but instead, she made things worse by maxing out credit cards, asking her mom for money, and leaving her to do all the housework even though her leg was hurt from the accident. I honestly think my mother-in-law is too lenient with her daughter. Dorothy is in her late 20s, but parents often feel they need to take care of their kids, no matter how old they are. That's why, even though my mother-in-law knows her daughter is unreliable, she feels she can't kick her out and lets her stay. I really didn't want to live with them. My mother-in-law is kind and gentle, but living together is hard, even with nice people. Most of all, I hated the idea of living with my sister-in-law. I wouldn't want to live with Dorothy even if someone paid me. I felt like she looked down on me from the start of our marriage. To put it simply, Dorothy is like a bossy friend who changes her group of friends one by one. I might sound childish for saying this, but I've always thought my sister-in-law was a mean person who used others for her own benefit. From the moment my husband introduced me to her, I felt she didn't like me. When she asked my name and I told her, she tried to hide a laugh. I'm 32 years old, but I think she laughed because she thought I was younger than I looked. She even said, "I thought you were about 40. You look so mature." This meant she thought I looked older than I really am. Since then, every time she saw me, she would comment on my clothes, mock my appearance, and laugh at me. She would say things like, "A grown woman over 30 wearing fast fashion? Oh my," or "You seem out of touch. Were you homeschooled? You don't seem like you'd fit in with my fashionable friends." I'm not someone who cares a lot about fashion, and I know I don't stand out in my style. Just because Dorothy thinks I don't dress well doesn't give her the right to make fun of me. I do have a few friends, and I feel sorry for anyone who says they like me when they see me being ridiculed so much. I knew we didn't get along from the start, and things just seemed to get worse. Since she had this attitude, I decided it was best to avoid her as much as I could. I chose to ignore her instead of arguing or pointing out her flaws. Then suddenly, my mother-in-law needed help, and the idea of living together came up. I told my husband that I really didn't want to live with Dorothy, but then my mother-in-law called and asked if I would reconsider. She was 62 at the time and planned to move into a senior living facility with support services when she turned 65. In 3 years. My mother-in-law asked if we could please share a home until she moved into a senior living facility. Faced with her desperate request, I couldn't find the words to say no. Although living together was a big ask, I thought of it as a limited arrangement. This made me agree to the plan. So, my husband and I have been living with his mother and sister for 2 years now, with only 1 more year left. My mother-in-law is keeping her promise and is actively looking for supportive housing, so our living arrangement won't last forever. I feel a bit guilty, like I'm pushing her out, but she reassures me that this was her plan all along. She likely wanted to take her time organizing the house during these 3 years. Looking back, I feel guilty for not agreeing to live together from the start, but the thought of living with my sister-in-law was really unpleasant. I needed time to prepare for it, and living with her has been challenging. Even now, I struggle with our daily interactions. At the beginning, Dorothy was especially harsh. She complained about the food I cooked and constantly criticized my cleaning. My mother-in-law and husband would scold her for this, but she didn't seem to care. It felt like she viewed me not as her brother's wife but more like a servant or maid. For about a week, she blamed me for how I washed her clothes. She said, "You shrank my clothes because of the detergent you chose. They're all misshapen and unwearable now. After 3 years of marriage, you still can't handle housework. You're basically useless." I wanted to tell her that the clothes shrank because she had gained weight, not because of me, but I didn't want to say something hurtful about her appearance, knowing how damaging those comments can be. So, I just said I'd be more careful next time and tried to end the conversation. But Dorothy isn't the type to forgive and forget. When my mother-in-law's friend visited, Dorothy laughed as she talked about how terrible I was at housework. My mother-in-law defended me, but Dorothy insisted there was no need and kept talking as if I were a useless appliance, not a human being or her relative. Sometimes I argued back, but mostly I just nodded and let her words wash over me. I didn't want to sink to her level and knew arguing would be pointless. I told my mother-in-law and husband that once we stopped living together this year, I didn't want anything to do with Dorothy, and they both agreed. I might be a bit spiteful, but I think Dorothy will have a hard time when my mother-in-law moves into a senior living facility. Dorothy has been living at home and spending her salary however she wants. I don't think someone like her can suddenly live on her own responsibly. Once we stop living together, we won't help her, and that feels like a little revenge. But sometimes it seems like even God is on my sister-in-law's side. She told me her boyfriend proposed to her. She said, "My boyfriend is tall, handsome, and kind. He has a great job at a big company, so I'm basically marrying into money. I'm so glad I worked on my looks and fashion. I wouldn't want a miserable life like someone I know living with in-laws after marriage." She laughed while looking at me, making it clear she was talking about me. Dorothy stood in front of me, smirking, and said, "I bet you thought I wouldn't be able to live on my own without my mom. Too bad for you, old lady." I couldn't help but blush a little because she hit the nail on the head with what I was thinking about her. At the same time, I felt a strong wave of frustration. "Congratulations on your engagement. But married life is tough, you know," I said. She might complain about my housework skills, but the one who really can't do anything is Dorothy. It was the best comeback I could think of, but she just looked triumphant. "Are you trying to act tough because I won't be around? My fiancé is rich and will hire a professional housekeeper, not someone useless like you." I felt utterly defeated. I had sworn I would never see Dorothy again once we stopped living together, so I decided to avoid her as much as possible during the remaining time we had as housemates. A month after Dorothy's announcement, her fiancé came to visit. I thought anyone who chose her couldn't be a good person. I even thought something terrible. Dorothy had warned me not to introduce myself to her fiancé. "I don't consider you family. Just serve the tea and go away. I'm not inviting you to the wedding anyway." I felt relieved when I heard that. I just wanted to cut ties with her as soon as possible. When her fiancé arrived, I reluctantly served tea as instructed. Knowing this might be the first and last time we met, I stole a quick glance at Dorothy's fiancé, and when I did, our eyes met. As her fiancé began to speak, Dorothy interrupted, saying it wasn't a big deal and told him I was just the housekeeper. "You don't have to worry, Steve. I told you before, right? I have a useless sister-in-law who can't do anything. It's a loss to get involved with her, so you can ignore her." Hearing that, I bowed my head slightly to her fiancé and left the room, feeling embarrassed. Then Dorothy's fiancé called my name. Maria, you were a senior consultant at the firm, right? I can't believe you're married to Dorothy's brother. Steve looked at me in disbelief. He was actually familiar to me. He was my junior at work until I quit after getting married. I had heard he changed jobs after that, but neither of us expected to meet again like this. Dorothy, I've heard a lot about your sister-in-law before, but I never knew it was Maria. I thought she must be a terrible person since you've only said bad things about her. But we used to work together. I know who she is. Dorothy didn't seem to understand why Steve was upset. I started to feel anxious about how badly my character had been misrepresented. You two knew each other? Dorothy asked bitterly. Steve explained how we had worked closely together. I had helped him at work and even lent him money when his mother needed surgery. I felt it was natural to help him as a senior at work, especially since my grandfather had just passed away and left me some inheritance. I never thought he would feel so indebted to me, but I realized that the money must have been a real lifesaver for him. Maria was a true friend to me, and yet you treat her like a housekeeper, Steve said. I know you can be harsh, but I can't stand someone who treats people like this. I need to rethink this. Our engagement is off. With a cold stare, Steve told Dorothy he was breaking off their engagement and tried to leave. Desperate to stop him, Dorothy grabbed his jacket as he got up from the sofa. No, it's not like that. This is just how Maria and I communicate. We joke around a lot, right, Maria? Dorothy looked to me for help in a panic, but I could only shake my head. Sorry, I can't lie. Hearing this, Dorothy broke down crying. Why are you ruining my marriage? It's your fault the engagement is off. She yelled and raised her hand to hit me, but my husband rushed in to stop her. Still lashing out, Dorothy was slapped by my mother-in-law. It's not Maria's fault. It's yours. You've been harassing her and causing trouble all this time. I won't tolerate it anymore. It's your own fault the engagement is off. You need to take responsibility for your actions. You will leave the house by the end of the month. At that moment, my mother-in-law finally snapped and decided to cut ties with her own daughter. Mom, you're on Maria's side too? Dorothy asked her mother, staring at her in disbelief. You are not a child anymore. Take care of yourself, my mother-in-law said. She then bowed her head to Steve and returned to her bedroom. From the other room, we could only hear Dorothy sobbing. Steve told me he would be in touch soon, and then he left our house. My husband and I exchanged glances. Maybe it's time for us to start looking for a new home, I suggested. My husband nodded in agreement, and from that moment on, we decided to move on with our lives as if Dorothy didn't exist. 3 months passed, and my mother-in-law moved to a senior housing facility. We also moved to a place as close as possible to her and began the process of selling the family home. Dorothy stayed locked up in her room until the day we moved, but we couldn't leave her behind, so we packed her belongings into boxes and sent them to a storage unit. On the day of the move, we gave my sister-in-law the bare essentials, the key to the storage unit, and the $3,000 severance payment we had received from my mother-in-law. It seemed like Dorothy had lost all motivation after her broken engagement and quit her job. I don't know what happened to her after that, and it seems Steve isn't in contact with her anymore. He told me that he was saved once again because of me. If I had gone through with that marriage, I would have definitely regretted it. You've always been my lifesaver, he said. I couldn't help but feel guilty because, in a way, Steve has been my lifesaver too. I had wished for my sister-in-law to struggle in the end, but maybe doing good deeds brings rewards like this. That's how I felt. My sister-in-law had treated me like a slave and constantly harassed me, which is probably why things turned out this way. I've never seen or felt God, but from now on, I want to live a life where I can hold my head up high.
Dimness had settled in the intensive care unit. The approaching morning was windless and slightly misty, indicative of good weather to come. The ward's walls hadn't yet reached their full brightness and appeared grey rather than dazzling white. A medical device stood in the far corner, and its rhythmic beeping was synchronized with the monitor's zigzagging display. The man lying on the bed was breathing so faintly it was almost imperceptible. Gradually, Ronald Sanders started to regain consciousness. It felt like emerging from the realm of Morpheus, which had held him captive longer than usual this time. His index finger twitched weakly before falling limp as he attempted to raise his hand. "At this rate, you won't be leaving your bed any time soon," Ronald thought to himself, a touch of irony in his mental voice. Ronald regained consciousness not immediately and lay for a couple of hours in a mixed state. He could hear everything around him, yet couldn't open his eyes to understand where he was. Along with the sensor beeping, a sharp, slightly unpleasant smell was one of the first sensations to reach him, causing discomfort. "Where am I? Why can't I see anything? There's the smell of chlorine and something else. Am I already in the afterlife?" For some inexplicable reason, the man wasn't afraid. After all, what's there to fear when everything has already happened? The morning was gradually dawning, and Ronald discerned this from the unfamiliar voices to his left, primarily female and quite resonant. "You go to the 5th ward. Check what's going on there," a voice echoed. "Okay, I'll be right back. I just need to grab the medicine list," came the prompt response. Ronald felt a surge of alarm. Medicine list? 5th ward? Am I in a hospital? He guessed. The beeping of medical monitors, the scent of disinfectants, and the conversations between nurses and orderlies all indicated he was in a hospital room. However, Ronald had no recollection of how he ended up here. His mind and body still felt groggy, as if wrapped in cotton wool, beyond his control. Suddenly he was overcome with a powerful thirst. His throat was parched, yet he was unable to signal that he was conscious. "I hope somebody comes to me soon, or I might die of dehydration," he thought. He had just mustered the strength to signal when the ward door opened, ushering in a wave of fresh air and expensive perfume. The sound of several steps, a mix of high heels and the swish of shoe covers, indicated at least 2 people. The businessman, Ronald, was surprised, but externally his face remained serene. "Mrs. Sanders, the doctor said visits are only after rounds, yet you're here so early," an unknown woman addressed Ronald's wife. "Listen, darling, he's my husband, and I decide when to visit him. I'll sort it out with Dr. Bennett. Don't worry. Please leave us alone for a few minutes," replied Brienne. "Well, why should I leave? Mr. Sanders is unconscious anyway," objected the nurse or orderly. Brienne's voice took on a threatening tone. "That's none of your business, dear. Go and give injections, administer drips, clean floors, whatever your job is, and I'll handle my husband myself." After a moment of heavy silence in the ward, the door closed, indicating the medical worker's departure. The silence was soon broken by the clomping of Brienne's heels, which felt like a needle piercing the immobile businessman's heart. Ronald could feel his wife's intense, evaluating gaze on him. "Why are you lying down? This is not a resort for you. Hand over the will, and that's it. You should have written a will for me first, and only then go into a coma for 2 months. Brienne sneered. Taken aback, Ronald began to sweat, his cheeks aflame and forehead damp. 2 months? What does she mean? Is this a joke or what? Or is this her way of shaking me up? Ronald pondered. What his wife said next made him rethink his opinion of her entirely. You're lying here like a vegetable and the business is idle. Who's going to look after your hotels? I've asked you many times. Write a power of attorney. Make a will. We can't predict what's going to happen. However, you're so stubborn. But don't worry, honey. Kyle and I will sort it out in no time." Brienne's words made him nauseous. His pulse quickened, and his heart throbbed in panic. God, what is she talking about? Has she been possessed? A frantic thought raced through his mind. Suddenly, his breathing grew laboured, his lungs failing him, his vision blurred, and his consciousness began to slip into cold darkness. Simultaneously, the room filled with the urgent beeping of sensors, alerting the medical staff that something was wrong. The last thing Ronald heard was a stern voice not tolerating any objection. "Why are there outsiders here? I told you not to let anyone into the ward until the rounds. Yet you've arranged for visitors." Brienne huffed indignantly. "What did I do wrong? I wanted what was best for him. I came to visit my beloved husband, and you're all here like fighting dogs. Why is everything beeping? If anything happens to my husband, I'll sue you." However, the female doctor swiftly ushered the unanticipated guest out of the room and instructed the nurse to prepare a defibrillator and an adrenaline injection. Every second was precious. "A shock! A shock! One more time!" Nothing. "One more time!" Brienne didn't see any of this. She briskly left the clinic and headed for her car, parked at the entrance. In her haste, she kicked a janitor's bucket, scattering the collected trash across the asphalt. "Why did you leave it in the hallway? Couldn't you find a better place? I almost tripped," she complained. "Hey, lady, what do you think you're doing?" the elderly man asked unhappily. Ignoring his remark, Brienne rudely pushed the janitor away when he tried to help her. From the kick to the unfortunate bucket, she managed to break her heel and had to hop her way to the car. The janitor sighed, shook his head reproachfully, and resumed his garbage collection. A medium-sized dog with fiery red hair, noticeable from afar, lingered around him. Charlie behaved calmly, not wanting to upset his new master. Previously, his owner was a half-blind retired schoolteacher who relied on the dog as a guide. Charlie learned to guide his owner to the store or the park when the leash was put on. Those were good times. However, a month ago, the owner died from a sudden and unpredictable heart attack. He had no time to call an ambulance and collapsed on the floor. Charlie didn't panic. He broke the window with his paws and jumped out. He ran to the neighbour's house, howling so loudly and pitifully that they understood the situation without words. Although the ambulance arrived quickly, the paramedics were unable to save the former teacher. Charlie chased after the ambulance that took his master away, following it to the hospital. A few days later, janitor Henry noticed him there. By this point, Charlie was noticeably limping. He had injured his paws on broken glass. The wounds had become inflamed, and in his pain, the poor dog tried to lick them for relief. Henry immediately understood the situation. He loaded the dog onto a cart and, ignoring the surprised glances of passers-by, took him to the vet. Charlie was fortunate. If Henry hadn't taken him to the vet any later, it would have been too late. From that point on, they began their life together. Charlie and the elderly janitor with a complicated past. Some suggested he had a criminal record, while others speculated that Henry was simply a homeless man who had decided to find stability due to his age. The truth, as it often does, lay somewhere in between. Henry was reticent about his past, providing elusive responses whenever clinic staff asked about it. After 2 months on the job, his true identity still remained a mystery for everyone. After seeing off with his eyes the wealthy young woman, Henry winked at Charlie, saying, "There has been justice, my friend. I've encountered such women in my life many times. They're like parasites, clinging to someone and never letting go until their victims' deaths." Charlie looked at him attentively and barked softly, careful not to attract the chief doctor's attention and cause trouble for the janitor. Henry smiled and patted the dog on the back of his neck. His workload was relatively light that day. After all, it was springtime. In the fall, during the golden leaf drop, janitors work relentlessly, often to the point of exhaustion and joint pain. But at this time of the year, things were easier, as long as one wasn't lazy and maintained order. Suddenly, Charlie perked his ears and turned his head towards the gate. Henry knew the busiest time was about to start. It was allowed time for people to visit their relatives in the wards. Some were rushing to surgery department, others to neurology or therapy. All were eager to visit a loved one battling a relentless disease. Typically, Charlie remained calm and didn't react to the visitors, but this time he became visibly excited and even wagged his tail. Henry turned around and was taken aback. Approaching him on the narrow walkway was an unusual couple. A thin, short woman and a boy of about 7 years old holding her hand. A mother and son, Henry thought, smiling. The boy held a balloon in his hands that persistently attempted to break free, only to be stopped by the resistance of a thin string held by its young owner. The boy wore a bright yellow jacket with a hood, and he looked like a little chick with skinny legs and wing-like hands. His mother was dressed more modestly, and her attire evoked nothing but pity in Henry. A worn, light coat, a lilac beret, a simple skirt and low-heeled shoes. Upon seeing a red dog a dozen meters away, the boy immediately ran to hug it. The boy's mother exchanged a questioning glance with Henry, but he simply nodded. "Don't worry, Charlie won't bite anyone, especially a child." The woman visibly relaxed and approached Henry, asking, "Good morning. Can you tell me where the emergency room is?" Henry readily pointed to a nearby building. "See that building with the blue roof? That's it." "Ah, I see. Do you know if they allow us to enter?" Her question seemed rather odd to Henry. "Well, they won't kick you out, of course, but they most likely won't let you enter the ward. You know, people are on the verge of life and death in there." The strange woman nodded, then shifted her gaze to her son, who was already busily playing with Charlie. "Tony, be careful, okay? You'll get your jacket all muddy. Are you going to the hospital with me, or will you stay in the yard?" "You go ahead. I'll look after the boy. Don't worry about Charlie. He's a sensible dog. He won't cause any trouble. I guarantee it," Henry offered with a smile. The woman's face lit up. "Oh, thank you very much. My name is Evelyn, and this is Tony." "And I'm Henry," the man replied with a respectful nod. "Cool, Mum. You go, and I'll take a little walk with the dog. Everything will be fine with me here," said the boy with an ingratiating smile. Evelyn agreed with such a plan and went towards the hospital, although she felt uncomfortable as she approached the intensive care unit. Where am I even going, and what will I say? Who am I to Ronald? A friend, subordinate, or just an acquaintance from the street? Evelyn thought as she entered the hall. Before she could take a few steps, a nurse on duty immediately approached her. "Hello, and who are you here to see?" Evelyn was visibly embarrassed, but it was too late to back out. "Good day, I'm here to see Ronald Sanders." The nurse shook her head disapprovingly. "No, you can't see him right now. He suffered a cardiac arrest half an hour ago, brought back from the brink. All of this happened after a woman, claiming to be his wife, visited. I let her in out of kindness, only to be reprimanded by the head of the department, so a visit is out of the question." Tears welled up in Evelyn's eyes. "A cardiac arrest? But he was admitted after a robbery. What does a heart attack have to do with it?" Just then the head of the department entered the hall. Seeing Evelyn's distress, he paused to explain. "Try not to worry too much. Mr. Sanders' health is quite good. However, a head injury is serious, and the effects can be permanent. For instance, he woke from a coma this morning only for his heart to fail minutes later. But we managed. So for now, go home and try not to dwell on this. By the way, who are you to Mr. Sanders?" Embarrassed, Evelyn lowered her gaze. "I'm a colleague, more precisely an employee. I work as a maid at one of his hotels." The doctor nodded, indicating the conversation had concluded. Evelyn hesitated briefly before approaching the on-duty nurse to ask, "Where do the windows in Ronald's room face?" "They overlook the courtyard, where the janitor is currently sweeping," the nurse replied readily. Evelyn thanked her and headed for the exit. Outside, the sun was shining brightly, radiating a warm, spring-like feel. The air was comfortably cool, not causing any discomfort or sweat. Evelyn loved spring, a season of dreams, unfulfilled hopes, magic, and an easy sense of love that resonates with those young at heart. "Mum, how's Uncle Ronald?" Tony asked. "He's improving slowly, Sonny. The doctor is confident he'll recover," Evelyn replied. A sweet smile spread across Tony's face. Evelyn gave her son a mysterious look before whispering something in his ear. As she spoke, Tony's happiness seemed to grow. Throughout this time, Henry stood aside observing his new acquaintances. Charlie was willing to follow little Tony to the ends of the earth. Henry had heard about dogs' affection for children, but he had not imagined it could be to this extent. Meanwhile, Evelyn took a balloon from her son's hands and tied it to a tree branch directly opposite the hospital ward windows. "When Ronald wakes up and sees the balloon, his mood will improve," Evelyn explained, noting the janitor's surprised look. The janitor nodded respectfully and started regarding the boy's mother with even more respect. The elderly man silently wished that each sick patient's relative would tie a balloon to the tree. He imagined how it would transform the yard and perhaps even encourage the patients towards recovery and discharge. Yet he chose not to voice these thoughts, not wishing to embarrass Evelyn. After a moment of thought, Henry said, "If you need any help, or if you're having housing issues, feel free to reach out to me. I live nearby, 512 Main Street, apartment 39. "Thank you very much. I'll keep you in mind," Evelyn said with a smile. Taking Tony's hand, they walked down the path leading to the exit. The janitor stood watching them for a long time, a small boy in a yellow jacket with a hood, and his petite mother, shivering with each gust of wind. "Well, Charlie, the fun's over. Time to get down to work," Henry whispered with a smile, giving the dog a pat on the back of its neck. The dog looked resentfully at his master, but there was nothing it could do. Such was the dog's fate, to wait, guard, and love. What else could it do? Meanwhile, in Ward number 5, Ronald Sanders finally regained consciousness. Of course, standing up or moving his limbs was out of the question. "How can I move when I nearly died?" And all because of Brienne and her confession. She said it as if she had stabbed me in the heart and injected poison into my bloodstream. How could it be? 4 years together and then this. Does she really hate me that much? But why? Ronald didn't know the answer to this question. He never gave his spouse any reason for doubt. Yes, he often had business trips, but that was part of the job. His work involved managing some hotels throughout the city and region, ensuring that the furniture, repairs and conditions were up to standard. Otherwise, clients would choose other accommodations. Ronald took his business seriously. He managed a chain of hotels called Crown Hall. Each establishment featured a restaurant on the first floor, where the image of a crown was prominent, from the napkins on the tables to the aprons of the waitstaff. He respected all the staff members, from the doormen and chefs with impeccable reputations to the ordinary kitchen workers. However, his wife Brienne often treated his subordinates poorly and made personnel adjustments that negatively impacted the overall profits of the hotels. She would belittle the waitstaff and criticize the chef, despite her lack of knowledge in haute cuisine. Once a chef even said to her, "Mrs. Sanders, forgive me for being blunt, but I wouldn't trust you to make an omelette." Ronald managed to defuse the situation with a joke. However, Brienne seemed to hold a grudge. This was apparent from the bright spots that appeared on her well-groomed face, a reaction Ronald had witnessed more than once, though he always tried not to draw attention to it. The situation remained relatively calm until Ronald employed Evelyn and her young son Tony at one of the hotels. They had met a month ago, under unusual circumstances. In early March, the weather was still chilly, and city dwellers sought shelter from the biting wind. Despite the calendar declaring winter over, the cold was still reaching out to those unfortunate enough to be outdoors. While passers-by had to bundle up in jackets, Ronald, comfortably seated in his luxurious SUV, felt no discomfort from the weather. After work, as was his routine, he parked his vehicle at the supermarket and shopped for groceries. Ronald had to do this almost daily, as he couldn't depend on Brienne's skills in this aspect. She was unable to cook, and any attempts often ended with the need for a fire extinguisher or a call to the fire department. Occasionally, when Ronald was not in the mood to cook, he would order delivery from his restaurant or ask the chef to prepare something special. However, today he didn't want to burden the chef with another request. Instead, he opted to buy groceries and cook for his wife. Stepping out of his warm car, Ronald noticed a frail woman with a child, around 6 to 7 years old. It was difficult to tell the child's exact age, due to his worn, shapeless jacket that made him resemble a mannequin from afar. Observing the woman, Ronald thought, "So young, and already with a child, and I've been telling my Brienne so many times to give birth to my heir, but she doesn't care. Only beauty salons and restaurants are on her mind." Suddenly, Ronald felt a wave of pity for the woman, shivering in the cold wind with her son, while the world around her carried on indifferently. It was evident to anyone that the woman was facing some difficulties. A pang of pain hit Ronald's heart. He couldn't help but notice the boy sitting quietly next to her, not crying, but just staring intently at one spot. Many believe that great wealth corrupts the soul, making one indifferent to others' suffering. Yet Ronald's example contradicts this statement. Approaching, he asked, "Hello? It seems you're having some difficulties. Can I help?" The stranger, embarrassed, lowered her eyes. She didn't say a word, just sighed sadly. Perhaps she's shy, Ronald thought, then added, "Don't worry, speak up. I genuinely want to help you and your boy. What's your name, young man?" The child looked warily at the businessman, bracing for a trick, then said, "Tony." "And I'm Ronald. Nice to meet you." Ronald responded with a smile. Despite herself, the woman also smiled and quietly introduced herself. "And I'm Evelyn Bogard." Ronald, trying not to emphasize her problems, said, "Listen, aren't you job hunting? Would you consider working for me as a maid or a dishwasher? We're short a few people at the hotel. What do you think?" Taken aback by the man's proposition, Evelyn hesitated and couldn't provide a clear response. Seeing her hesitation, Ronald encouraged her. "Don't be scared. I'm being honest. I don't mean to offend you. Besides, do I look like a scoundrel? I can see you need help, and I can offer you a job and money. What do you think, Evelyn?" She responded with a resigned gesture. "Yes, I agree. You don't seem like a maniac." Ronald laughed. "No, I have no ties with criminals. My business is legal. A few hotels in the city and surrounding area. You've likely noticed the crown symbol on some buildings. That's all my place is. Everything is legal and clear. Even the tax authorities have no complaints against me." Evelyn examined him closely and discerned that this stranger meant her no harm. His face was too open and kind to possess any malice. "If you agree, why not get in the car? You're catching a chill in this wind. It might look like spring, but winter is still holding on," Ronald offered with a smile, gesturing towards his SUV. Tony's eyes lit up. "Wow, may I sit behind the wheel, or at least honk the horn? So the boys on the street can see. They'll be jealous." Ronald smiled. "Of course, why not? Stay in the car while I run to the store. We're a bit out of stock. You're sleeping over at my house tonight, and tomorrow I'll show you the hotel. You'll be able to work and live there." Evelyn glanced doubtfully at the dark blue car, then realized there was nothing to lose. She had accepted this hospitable offer. When her son got up from the bench, Ronald noticed his noticeable limp. Noticing the man's gaze, Evelyn explained, "He's had this since early childhood. One leg is a bit shorter than the other. That's why he needs corrective shoes, which are quite costly. You know, the ones with orthopedic insoles. Tony used to have a pair, but he outgrew them. Now he makes do with what's available. I've tried to put inside cardboard, but it doesn't really help. You can see the result." Ronald nodded in understanding. "All right, get into the car and I'll be right back." Evelyn opened the massive door of the SUV with great difficulty and sat down in the passenger seat in the back. Meanwhile, little Tony climbed up front, eager to examine the dashboard that reminded him of a spaceship's interior. There was even an embedded screen playing a movie. His eyes widened in surprise, and he clapped his hands with joy. Ronald rushed to the supermarket, planning to buy twice the usual amount of food. After all, along with him and Brienne, 2 more guests were joining their evening meal. Navigating the shopping aisles, he picked out items he thought the boy and his mother might enjoy. He was familiar with Brienne's preferences, but knew that regardless of his purchases today, she would likely be dissatisfied. Whether she was on a meat-free diet or trying to gain weight, her demands often varied, so it was quite difficult to content her. However, Ronald had grown used to his wife's whims, as they had been married for more than a year. He was raised in a working-class family without a father, and he was a humble man who never aspired to greatness. From a young age he was independent. His grandmother recalls that at 7 years old, Ronald could easily prepare himself a simple lunch or breakfast, consisting of fried eggs or mashed potatoes. This independence likely contributed to his success in business. Ronald met Brienne, a vibrant brunette with raven-coloured hair, at a corporate party attended by the city's high society. While Ronald typically disliked such events, his status obligated him to attend. It was at this party that Brienne approached him, offering a flirtatious smile and inviting him to dance. The usually cautious Ronald was immediately captivated by her. Their courtship period passed quickly, and it was clear to all who knew them that a wedding was imminent. The news of Brienne's pregnancy ultimately prompted Ronald to decide to marry. "Can you believe I'm on 4th week? We're having a baby, honey. Our baby. I wonder what kind of eyes he'll have. Like yours, brown, or like mine, green," Brienne said with a smile. Overwhelmed with love for his partner, Ronald proposed to her that very evening. Unfortunately, their joy was short-lived. A month later, Brienne miscarried, while Ronald was away on a business trip. On the fateful evening, she had decided to cook a delicious dinner, but lacking cooking skills, she spent too long at the stove, became dizzy, and fainted. Somehow, she managed to call an ambulance. Brienne wasn't sure how she did it. She likely acted automatically or out of sheer willpower. Ever since the incident, Ronald blamed himself daily. He felt he had failed to protect his wife and ensure her safety. Brienne had many times suggested hiring a housekeeper and a maid, but he had always refused, insisting they could manage on their own. Truthfully, Ronald was slightly uncomfortable with his wealth and was against the idea of having a servant. In his view as a young businessman, it seemed outdated, a throwback to the times of czars and landlords. Of course, there was nothing inherently wrong with it, but Brienne's ordeal forever changed his life and hers. After they lost their baby, Brienne seemed like a different person. She began spending more time at beauty salons, restaurants, and during Ronald's business trips, she visited clubs in the company of her friends. Ronald didn't mind Brienne enjoying herself, but sometimes it was too much. Once, he returned from a business trip earlier than expected and found that Brienne was not home. Holding a bouquet of roses, he suddenly felt foolish and discarded it. Like a scene from a cheap movie, all I wanted was to make her feel good, Ronald muttered, a bitterness lacing his words. The situation was as old as time itself. Many would have suspected adultery, but he didn't jump to conclusions. He called his wife, and it turned out she was visiting her best friend, who easily confirmed her words, which finally dispelled his doubt. Despite the whispers among his hotel and restaurant staff about his wife's infidelity, Ronald chose to ignore them. His business partners only shook their heads. Whether Brienne was deceiving Ronald or not, it didn't concern them as long as he fulfilled his obligations. Being a man of action, Ronald was always expanding his business empire. While this unsettled some, they couldn't compete with the growing popularity of his hotel chain. At some point, Brienne decided to join the family business and began to make her own changes in certain processes. She bought inexpensive clothes on sale and, disguised as an unassuming customer, visited her husband's hotels. Of course, service in Ronald's hotels did not depend on the wealth of the client, because Ronald demanded from the staff that even if a homeless man with money came to their places, he should be served no worse than the mayor of the city. But Brienne had her own plan. Hiding her appearance behind a layer of makeup and a wig, she watched the doormen, waitresses, dishwashers, and discreetly made notes in her notebook, noting those who needed to be fired in the near future. The personnel changes didn't take long. In the Crown Hall hotels began to mass dismissal of maids, and waiters were afraid of customers, expecting in every second to see Brienne's spy. Ronald tried to discuss the situation with his wife, but their conversations often ended in arguments. Brienne insisted that she was making necessary changes that Ronald, in her opinion, was too naive to see. "They're taking advantage of you," she'd say. "The waitresses, the cleaning staff, they're making a fortune at your expense. We'll put a stop to this, and you'll be a millionaire." Ronald shook his head. "Brienne, you shouldn't be so adamant. I believe in living and letting live. If you keep being tough on the staff, they may not serve customers well. Instead of constantly checking on my people, why don't you try working a shift at one of the restaurants or hotels? Then you'll understand the reality." "No way. It's not a good idea for the wife of the owner of this business to serve the customers. I'd better replace all the employees and get what I want. You'll see. Soon we'll have a lot of money." Brienne objected. Ronald gave his wife an ironic look, not believing a word she said. As expected, Brienne's predictions never came true. Her interference in the restaurant and hotel business resulted in a severe shortage of good staff, making it incredibly challenging for Ronald to manage. So, when the opportunity to provide Evelyn and her son with a place to live, in exchange for her working at one of his establishments, came up, he gladly took it. He had no plans to charge the young mother for the accommodation. Returning to his SUV with a bag full of groceries, the man saw Evelyn's expression and immediately sensed her anxiety. She must have been fearing the upcoming encounter with his wife. Evelyn, being astute, had noticed the wedding ring on Ronald's right hand, leading her to anticipate a potentially uncomfortable conversation at the businessman's house. Unfortunately, her instincts proved correct that evening. While young Tony remained oblivious due to his age, Evelyn was confronted with an extremely unpleasant situation. Upon seeing Evelyn in her worn-out jacket, Brienne sneered, "Oh, who on earth is this? She must be homeless. Where did you find her, dear? And that boy looks like a street urchin from the highway. They'll probably steal something without even saying thanks to us." Ronald turned pale, but faced his wife defiantly. "Brienne, you shouldn't be so harsh. This is Evelyn Bogard and her son Tony. They will be working for us at the hotel or restaurant." Brienne's face turned crimson with anger. "So, they're also going to work for us? Are you out of your mind? Have you asked if this beggar has the medical papers? She looks like she's covered in diseases. And that kid, what if he's stolen? These beggars, do you know what they do? They take a street child and walk around with him. They trick fools like you for money." Evelyn's eyes filled with tears, her lips trembling as she reached for the doorknob. However, Ronald was firm in his decision. "Evelyn, calm down. I'll handle everything. You go into the living room. Yes, the bathroom is straight ahead and to the left. If you need to, You can take a shower while I prepare dinner." Evelyn nodded forcefully, avoiding eye contact with Brienne. Brienne, on the other hand, felt like a ruler of destiny. She was controlling everything in the house, from approving maid candidates to the selection of hotel services and restaurant menus. As the guests entered the living room, she muttered to Ronald, "You shouldn't have meddled with this beggar. Mark my words, it won't end well. She could easily break into your safe, as you never lock it. You should hire a locksmith to fix it, especially since you store substantial sums of money. Are you just relying on chance?" Ronald raised an eyebrow in surprise. "The safe is broken, you say? How do you know the lock is defective? I haven't told anyone about it." Brienne pursed her lips in resentment, realizing she had made a mistake. In reality, Ronald had known for a while that his wife was gradually taking money from the safe. However, Brienne did it carefully and, judging by the expenses, spent them on entertainment or buying fashionable clothes, which she was just crazy about. Being a shrewd and forward-thinking man, Ronald chose not to confront her to avoid causing discomfort for either of them. The dinner unfolded in an atmosphere of hostility and undisguised resentment. Seated across from Evelyn, Brienne couldn't help but glare. The restless boy, unable to remain quiet for even a minute, further fueled her irritation. Ronald understood his interest because he guessed that the boy's childhood was very difficult. The man had long known that all unhappy people were unhappy in their own way, and therefore, as much as possible, he tried to help them and alleviate their mental suffering. He supported orphanages and animal shelters, his contributions extending beyond mere monetary donations. Ronald personally delivered gifts to the children in the orphanages, even dressing up as Santa Claus during Christmas. He shared in their joy as they celebrated the holiday season, dancing around the Christmas tree with them. Ronald routinely inspected and maintained shelters for homeless animals, ensuring they were always clean and comfortable. Despite Ronald's goodwill and kindness, Evelyn found that dinner very stressful. Brienne behaved arrogantly and, after having too much champagne, began hurling insults. Evelyn endured it, understanding her position, and only little Tony looked at Ronald with tears in his eyes, as if asking the kind businessman to stop this black farce. Fortunately, the guests only stayed at Ronald's house for a day before moving to one of his hotels. They were given a double room with all conveniences, including internet, satellite TV, and even a game console that Ronald purchased for Tony at his own expense. Many employees wondered why Ronald was being so generous, effectively giving up a profitable hotel room. However, the reason became clear when Evelyn started working. Ronald had never had a better maid, and likely never would. Evelyn was diligent, cleaning the windowsills until they shone and maintaining the perfect moisture levels for the flowers. She was always courteous and kind, regardless of her personal mood or issues. Unoccupied rooms were always clean, comfortable, and inviting under her care. The difference was noticeable, inspiring the other maids to match her standard of work. Brienne still despised Evelyn and eagerly awaited the moment to get rid of her. The woman had her own loyalists among the hotel and restaurant staff, whom she had personally hired. These employees were ready to defend Brienne, treating Ronald with noticeable disdain. They concealed their contempt in public, but when in a safe environment, they freely criticized their superiors. One such loyalist was Kyle, the hotel administrator. His good looks likely helped him secure his role. Rumours circulated about a passionate affair between him and Brienne, but no one could confirm it. And of course, people just did not want to pry into the matter, fearing they could lose their jobs. It was well known that crossing Brienne was risky, as she held significant influence in Ronald's business and appointed favourites based on her own judgment. On one occasion, Brienne even tried to frame Evelyn by accusing her of stealing a wallet from a client. Evelyn, of course, swore she had never taken anything that didn't belong to her, but Brienne smiled mysteriously and gestured towards her bag hanging in the back room. "Well, do you want to open it yourself, or should I open it?" "No need, I'll do it myself," Evelyn hurriedly announced, her voice trembling as she sought to fulfill Brienne's request. Sure that she was innocent, she opened her bag and was stunned. Inside, among her other belongings, was the stolen wallet. The poor maid felt a wave of discomfort and dizziness and fainted. "Look at the scene she's causing. You shouldn't be working in a hotel, dear, but in a theatre. A sold-out show would be guaranteed." Brienne scoffed. The situation was escalating quickly, but despite the fact that all the evidence was against Evelyn, Brienne did not take into account one thing. It turned out that her husband had a video recording from the internal security camera. The young businessman had kept the camera's capabilities a secret from the staff, intending to use it as strong evidence in case of a dispute. It was then that it was revealed that Brienne had planted the unfortunate wallet in Evelyn's bag, aiming to discredit the undesired maid in front of Ronald. Later that day, the couple had an argument in Ronald's office. "You know what, Brienne? This is too much. I expected anything and everything from you, but not this. I believe we should break up and start preparing for a divorce." Brienne pursed her lips resentfully and glared at her husband. "Divorce, you say? Break up? Fine. I don't mind splitting up, but remember, I'm legally entitled to half of your business. After all, I am your wife, a legally wedded one at that." Ronald's eyes sparkled with a mysterious gleam. "That's where you're mistaken, Brienne. While you were busy with your affairs and plotting to fire Evelyn, I consulted a notary and drafted a will. If I were to die prematurely, or whatever, everything goes to my parents. They may be old, but they can handle it, and in the event of a divorce, you'll get nothing. Did you forget how you insisted I draw up a prenup? You didn't even realize what you were signing." At the mention of the inheritance and the prenuptial agreement, Brienne's face immediately changed. A few minutes later, in a soft, repentant voice reminiscent of a schoolgirl, she asked, "And the will? Have you already had it notarized?" Ronald shook his head. The businessman's anger gradually faded, and the thought of divorce no longer seemed so urgent. "No, I haven't had time, Brienne, but I'll do it one of these days. Don't worry, I'll take care of everything. I know many things. You lied to me about the miscarriage. You weren't pregnant. I found out right after I went to the emergency room, and they told me that they never had no patient with your name. But I tolerated it. I thought you'd improve. I was waiting for you to become sensible and have a baby, but you're only creating obstacles for yourself." Tears glistened in Brienne's eyes. "Ronald, I'm sorry, you're right. I should have come to my senses a long time ago. Can you forgive me, dear? I overacted with Evelyn, and her son too. You only wanted what's best for him. You had him checked by an orthopedist. Massages, therapies, special shoes. He doesn't even limp now. But forgive me, I was a little jealous. And all this was because I love you very much. And I was afraid of losing you." Unfortunately, Ronald heeded her words and delayed his visit to the notary for another time. And a day after their conversation, he was found in an alley 3 meters from his car with a head injury. The main theory was robbery, a common occurrence that led wealthy individuals to hire personal guards. But Ronald always relied on his own strength and was confident he could handle any situation. And now, lying in a hospital bed, he realized his mistake. Unfortunately, Ronald did not know the most important thing. While he was being treated at the clinic, Brienne waited 2 months and kicked Evelyn and her son out of the hotel room where they were staying. "And I don't want you to set foot here again." "If I see you, you'll be dead," she said maliciously. Ironically, it was the same day Evelyn visited the emergency room. She and Tony were left wandering the streets, not knowing where to go. At that moment, Tony suddenly remembered the janitor's suggestion. "Mum, can we go to Henry and Charlie? He suggested it, and, in general, he's such a nice man. Smart. I had a good time with him. He's like a grandfather." Evelyn looked at her son with surprise and said, "Yes, we can try. Of course, it's inconvenient since we were just suggested this today. But we have been evicted from our hotel, so we have no choice. We can't spend the night on the street. Let's try staying at Henry's." The elderly man was delighted to welcome his new friends back. He served them dinner, offered them his room, and settled himself in the living room, where he laid a mattress on the floor. Henry, unaccustomed to such conditions, was an experienced man who had seen a lot and kept a secret known to almost no one. However, he had no intention of revealing his hand before the right time and patiently waited for the next day. In the morning, after preparing a quick breakfast, Henry suggested that Evelyn and Tony visit the businessman who had nearly suffered a cardiac arrest the previous day. Mother and son looked at each other in surprise. They didn't quite understand why the kind old man had suddenly decided to visit someone he barely knew. Henry only smiled enigmatically, saying, "Don't worry, I'll explain everything to you, but later, okay?" Surprised, Evelyn nodded. After she and Tony stepped into the hallway, the elderly man pulled out a miniature walkie-talkie from his pocket, quietly commanding, "Everyone, get ready. The operation is nearing its final phase." His words were so odd that even Charlie's ears perked up. Within half an hour, Henry was in the intensive care unit's hall, where police had detained Brienne and her lover Kyle. The criminal duo had syringes filled with a toxic liquid, which they intended to surreptitiously administer to Ronald. Still not understanding what was going on, Evelyn looked at the janitor as he sharply threw off his cloak, underneath which was a perfectly fitting police uniform. "Forgive me, but this was a special circumstance," Henry said. "Ronald certainly doesn't know it, but he's not a stranger to me. In fact, I'm his biological father. His mother and I separated over 35 years ago. I moved to another city, graduated from the academy, and dedicated my life to serving law. I only discovered Ronald was my son 6 months ago, and since then I've been keeping an eye on him, as much as I can. I never imagined Ronald's wife's lover would try to kill him. So, when I learned about the threat to my son's life, I took a janitorial job to be closer to him and to monitor his surroundings." Brienne, handcuffed, glared at Henry. "You're a scoundrel. You purposely put that bucket in my path, causing me to break my heel. Did you not?" Henry grinned. "Of course I did it on purpose, dearie. I needed to plant a wiretap in your pocket to learn about your plans with Kyle. You had no sympathy for my son. You wanted his inheritance, but I wasn't going to let that happen. Now, Brienne, you'll never be near my Ronald again. As for Evelyn and Tony, I hope they'll become constant figures in his life, because they truly love my son and care about his well-being." At that moment, Evelyn felt as if everything happening to her was just a dream. She thought to herself, "No, this can't be how it happens." On that day, the entire hospital learned about the outstanding transformation of the janitor. As is often the case, Ronald was one of the last to find out, after the doctors finally allowed him to have visitors. Seeing a uniformed man walk into his room, the businessman grew noticeably anxious. "I'm sorry, son. I should have told you sooner, but I feared I would be a burden or hinder you. When I learned you were in danger, I felt compelled to step in," whispered Henry, swiftly brushing away a tear. Ronald smiled and touched the shoulder of his father, whom he had never met before in his life. A minute later the ward door opened, and Tony, along with Evelyn, appeared on the threshold. The boy held a red balloon, while its twin floated on a tree in the hospital yard. Henry smiled before addressing his son. "I hope you respect my fatherly advice, son. My guidance to you is this. Always keep them close to you, and care for them like they're the apple of your eye. It's likely you're unaware that Evelyn has a secret. Tony is not her son, but her nephew, who was orphaned in an accident that took his older sister's life." At that moment, Ronald gave Evelyn such a tender look that could say without words many things. However, it was only a little later, 6 months to be exact, when he verbally expressed his feelings and proposed to Evelyn, and soon the retired police officer danced at his son's wedding and celebrated the most significant victory of his life. "Mummy, why do you sound so lifeless? Can you hear me? Are you there?" Gail's soft voice from the cell phone echoed with concern in her mother's ear. Yes, sorry, daughter. You know how I can easily fall out of the conversation after work." Samantha tried to infuse her voice with a semblance of light-hearted calmness. "So, Tom, Naomi and I are visiting you on Christmas. Or do you have any other plans? Let me know immediately so I can quickly adjust our plans." "Honey, frankly speaking, I'm not sure about your dad's plans." Samantha exhaled. "I can only assume they're wonderful. It's a shame to say, but he left me for a younger, beautiful woman. They've been seeing each other for a while now, so we're going to divorce officially. I'm sorry to drop such news on Christmas. You know I've never been good at keeping things from you." "Mummy, I'm coming to see you. As soon as Tom gets home from work to watch Naomi, I'll grab a cab and be there right away." "Gail, I'm fine. You don't need to disrupt a 2-year-old schedule because of me. It won't make me feel any better." "Mum, that kid has a dad, a perfectly adequate, responsible modern father. You can fool anyone with your calm voice, but not me. I'll be an hour and a half." Samantha listened to 3 quick beeps in the receiver and smiled sadly. She considered herself fortunate to have the daughter like Gail. Not everyone is so lucky. Samantha learned about the challenges of adolescence from other people's stories. She also managed to avoid the drama of Gail's first love. In fact, there was no drama at all. Gail took her studies seriously, found a job in her second year, and managed to balance both. By the end of her time at the college, she had saved up for a vacation to Italy, with a little help from her parents. On the plane, Gail met her future husband, Tom. They spent a week in Venice, Florence and Rome. 6 months after returning home, they got married and welcomed their first daughter, Naomi. Samantha found joy in her role as a devoted grandmother, feeling almost perfectly content. She and her husband Mark led a perfectly typical life for a long-time couple. They didn't quarrel or dispute fundamental issues. They lived in peace. Mark was a good earner and managed money wisely. Until yesterday noon, Samantha was thinking her marital life was quite well. She invested her whole heart and effort into her family, not viewing it as a sacrifice. It was her joy to care for her husband and maintain a cosy home, a sanctuary they both looked forward to returning to after work. Their apartment might not be larger or more comfortable than those of their friends, but everyone loved to gather there during the holidays. Samantha always had everything so well arranged. Mark's friends often showed joking envy, and he seriously took Samantha's care of himself as a due. For the past few years, Mark had been working on building a country house, dedicating all his spare time to it. Samantha didn't have an opportunity to visit the construction site every week, which initially caused her great concern. However, Mark reassured her, saying, "Samantha, relax. No one can do everything at once. You just want to be everywhere. It would be better if you managed things here, and I took care of things there." Samantha understood. or at least she thought she did. He truly needed something of his own, where he was alone, was the boss. So she stepped back, relinquishing control of the estate affairs to her husband. And yesterday morning she suddenly fell ill at work. She experienced weakness and a headache so severe that her usual medication didn't help. She must have looked quite unwell, because even her boss, who was often described as indifferent, looked at her and said, "Samantha, sometimes it's better to take a couple of days off than to be sick for 2 weeks. Go home and rest. Come back to work the day after tomorrow. It won't affect your paycheck. I don't need exhausted employees. I'm not as indifferent as some people claim." Samantha nodded gratefully and headed home. It's fascinating how we sometimes misjudge people, especially our bosses. Quietly, Samantha entered the apartment, trying not to make noise. Mark had arrived late from a business trip and she didn't want to disturb his sleep. However, Mark wasn't sleeping. From the living room she could hear a conversation. Judging by the lack of another voice, Mark was on the phone, but his voice and intonation were uncharacteristically different. "My sweet sunshine, I'm coming over today. My wife is pickling tomatoes after work today with a new recipe. There are new recipes every year, but the wife is getting older. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to joke around. Yes, I'm going to tell her the truth soon. I appreciate your understanding, I really do. I'm glad you don't want to spend Christmas without me. I'll make a decision soon, I promise. My dear girl, don't be naive. Try to understand my situation. It's not easy for me. I'm not devoid of emotions. It's a marriage of more than 25 years and a daughter raised. I feel sorry for Samantha. She's becoming old, wrapped up in just 5 years. She'll look really old. But she's dedicated to the family. Her pantry is full of things she has made. She always aims for perfection. If I leave, she'll be alone. Well, she'll still have our daughter and son-in-law. No, it's not that I'm uncomfortable. I don't care about her cooking and nice curtains in the house. I don't want to spend the rest of my life fishing on the lake just to escape from my wife. I need joy in my life. And you are my joy." Samantha looked at herself in the mirror and saw an aged, grey, tired woman. She couldn't compete with anyone. If it weren't for her throbbing headache, she would have run outside, aimlessly wandering until evening, or until she regained control and her ability to think clearly. But she didn't even have the energy to descend the stairs. She attempted to close the door quietly. However, her husband heard the sound. He said goodbye to his conversationalist and stepped into the hallway. "I've decided not to do the tomato pickling, if you don't care," Samantha managed to say, mustering her remaining strength. "Samantha, perhaps it's better that you heard everything. I hate lying to you. I should have ended it long before. You're a good person, and I'm sorry, but there's no point in continuing this," he replied. "Yeah," Samantha responded indifferently. "It's good that you at last recognize your old wife as a human being." "Samantha, what's the point of this bitterness? Let's be honest, I'm only 53, and I still crave love. Why should I give that up? Gail is already an adult and has her own family, and now we have almost nothing to connect us. You're just refusing to accept it, clinging to this empty shell of a marriage. Look after our granddaughter. Now you have someone to care for. I could have lived like that. Like most people my age, but I got lucky. A beautiful young woman fell in love with me, and I deeply love her. Not everyone is so fortunate. This is my new life, a genuine life. One can't turn that down. It's a gift. Thanks to her, I now realize how unhappy I was. This is my chance to start fresh. You won't lose out. You're the mother of my daughter. I'll leave you this apartment. I won't take anything from here, except for my clothes and shoes. I'll live in the house with her. It's fair. I had put my money and effort into it. As for our car, You don't drive and you didn't invest in it, so it's logical that I keep it to myself. I'll provide you with some initial funds. We'll discuss the amount." "What if I ask for a lot?" Samantha asked. "We'll discuss it," Mark patiently repeated. "Wow, so deeply in love yet so rational. You've thought all this out for a while, haven't you? Only resolve was lacking, but everything else was well planned. What a strategist you are. Samantha, can we handle this amicably, please?" "In case you haven't noticed, I'm not barking at you like a dog. I don't need to have this conversation at all. I came home because I have a headache. I'm going to take a warm bath. It helps. While I'm taking my bath, gather your belongings and papers. Don't leave anything behind. And leave your keys. You can file for divorce yourself. I would like you not to drag it out. I'll show up on the appointed day and hour and we'll get divorced. I don't need your money. My salary is enough for me. Just don't show up after that. So that the day of the divorce is the last time I see you. And if you want, you can give your share of the apartment to Gail, so that your love won't disinherit the girl. It's really fair, don't you think?" "Mum, how could you think of my inheritance at this moment?" Gail was quietly amazed when her mother finally told her what had happened. "And who should I be thinking about, daughter?" Samantha shrugged her shoulders, and a shadow of a sad grin crossed her pale face. "When such a thing happens, it's necessary to hold on to something that will maintain interest in life. I am happy. I have you and my lovely son-in-law Tom, and I also have my cute granddaughter Naomi. I promise not to burden you excessively with my care, and not to turn into an annoying old grandmother, which your father thinks I am. I've reflected a bit, and his words make sense. I've always tried to ensure that he was well fed, dressed in clean clothes, rested peacefully, and surrounded by comfort. It was like domestic service. It seemed like the right thing to do for the family. I didn't realize he needed anything else. I should have thought more about myself, tried to be charming, and things might have turned out differently, although it's pointless to speculate about it now." "You're making excuses for him, then?" asked Gail. "Honestly, Mum, you surprise me with this tendency to always blame yourself for everything. It's too much. I didn't tell you before, but I will now. I had a conversation with Dad about 3 years ago when he gifted you a blender on your birthday. It's a good blender. It still works." Samantha nodded. "Mum, it's not a gift. It's just something you buy when you need it for no reason. Back then, I suddenly remembered that for every holiday, Dad would give you some practical and useful household item. When I told him about it, he seemed surprised, as if it were the first time he had heard that gifts could be perfume, jewellery, theatre tickets, or a spa visit. Something to show he sees you as a woman and wants to make you happy. But he didn't listen to me, even got angry, saying I was still naive and trying to tell him how to treat his wife. I didn't think much of it at the time, and now it's come back to me. Mum, you were convenient for him. You were content with a blender or multi-cooker and didn't spend much on self-care. He didn't want a beautiful, well-groomed wife. He wanted a convenient one. I hope his new girlfriend will have spent all his earnings on her beauty." "Gail, you've even cheered me up." Samantha smiled with a hint of confusion. "I didn't realize I'd raised you to be so vindictive." "Mum, I just love you very much. I feel sorry for you. And you certainly don't deserve such a thing. All Tom's friends are jealous that he has such a mother-in-law. They joke that he married me because of you. Father is just used to deluxe care. Took it for granted all his life. He'll be sorry, you'll see." "I don't want him to regret anything. Let him go in peace." "Thank you, Gail, but please don't argue with Daddy. You're an adult, you're diplomatic, and he's still your father. Our divorce is our business. It has nothing to do with you. Besides, he promised to take care of your inheritance." Don't worry, Mummy. I won't give up my half of the kingdom, Gail reassured her mum with a smile, if only to prevent some toothy, predatory shark from getting it. I admire your self-control. I never realised that you are so strong. Suddenly, tears sprang from Samantha's eyes as if breaking through an invisible dam. Gail, daughter, don't understand myself. I wanted to scream. I wanted to beg him, don't leave me. Let's try to make things right. I'll forgive everything. I'll take everything into account. I just want you to stay. But I held back. I couldn't cry in front of him. You're the one I trust, and I'm crying in front of you, and I'm not ashamed. Gail got up from her chair, went over and hugged her mother, stroking her head, while Samantha sobbed and started to feel better. Oh, Gail, there is some good news after all, she said a few minutes later. I've fallen out of love with him. When I exited the bathroom, he had already left. The apartment was as clean as ever. I automatically walked into the closet, needing something to occupy my hands. The shelves were still neatly organised, with gaps where his underwear used to be. Everything was in its place. His shirts and jackets were gone, along with their hangers, so they won't wrinkle in their new home. The drawer where he kept his documents was also neat. There was no mess, as there might have been if he had left rushing or while emotional. He was meticulously preparing for his new life. Suddenly I found the whole situation amusing and repulsive, and I fell out of love with him. Just like that. In an instant, really. Mum, I sincerely hope that's how you feel, in fact. It's a blessing if it's true. You won't waste your time suffering needlessly. Instead, you'll live your life, reconnect with old friends, go to the theatre. You'll finally take care of yourself. We can style your hair, dye it, update your wardrobe. We can even send you on a vacation to celebrate your divorce. That sounds good, doesn't it? Starting a new life, as Gail suspected, was only easy in theory. In practice, it was slow and laborious. Samantha suddenly had a lot of spare time, but she wasn't excited about it. You're just confused, Samantha's friend Hilary reassured her. You can't rebuild many years of life in a month. Don't rush yourself. Everything will fall into place. Hilary had been living alone for several years. Her son had gone to the capital for his studies and stayed there. After a disastrous marriage, Hilary had no desire to remarry. Her ex-husband was a domineering man and barely managed to escape from him. He threatened to take their son in the event of a divorce, using his influence and connections, among other threats. But fortunately, he ended up in jail due to some shady dealings, as Hilary explained. Taking advantage of the situation, Hilary quickly divorced him and moved to another city. Her son joined the same class where Gail was studying, and that's how the two young mothers met at a parent-teacher meeting. Hilary cherished her freedom and knew how to use it. She might not have been traditionally beautiful, but she was charming, friendly, and positive. She attracted men and wasn't afraid to engage in relationships, but she would promptly end them if she felt they were trying to control her. You're so wary. Maybe you can imagine it sometimes, Samantha speculated, listening to the reason for another breakup. No, Samantha, I try to judge people with an open mind. But consider this. He prefers a woman in dresses, heels, while I'm always in jeans and sneakers. I'm not feminine enough for him. But Samantha, you know, I really despise heels. I prefer comfortable shoes, not this 20th century attire. I run. I don't glide like a swan. I wasn't lying to him, pretending to be someone else. When I met him, I was wearing sneakers. Why should a man try to change me when he could find a woman who naturally fits his preferences? Hilary, he needs you, but he just has different taste in clothes. You're missing the point. It's not about my appearance. It's about control. I've had enough of these Pygmalion types. It always starts this way. It started this way with my husband, too. Arguing with Hilary was futile, and back then Samantha had no desire to do so. Samantha was much less experienced in relationships. She had only been with Mark, who she married young, and there were no other men in her life. However, Samantha never regretted this. Even now, she believed her lack of experience had saved her from many disappointments. It amazed her how Hilary wasn't afraid to start over each time. Samantha herself wouldn't pursue another relationship now. Samantha met Mark at a typical disco in their local club. On that night, she had gone out for the first time, encouraged by her friends and her mother. "Why stay at home? No one will come knocking on your door," her mother had said, worried because Samantha was in her 20s and hadn't met anyone yet. In the mother's opinion, her daughter, though not strikingly beautiful, was pretty, with a slim waist, thick, slightly curly brown hair and soft honey-colour eyes. However, Samantha was slightly self-conscious about her appearance, which, she thought, was too ordinary. "You're too hard on yourself. You shouldn't be," her mother reassured her. At the party, a skinny, handsome brunette, dressed stylishly and sober unlike many others at the disco, approached Samantha and said, quite politely, "Hi, my name is Mark. I haven't seen you here before." "Samantha, I don't usually come to places like this. I'm here with the girls just for company." "How do you find it?" "Too many drunks. I don't like it. I don't think I'll be coming back here." "Yeah, me neither. Listen, Samantha, would you like to go to a cosy cafe and talk? I'd like to invite you." "Let's go," Samantha said, sounding confused. She was eager to leave, and Mark seemed sincere and kind. Plus, she'd never been invited out except by her girlfriends. By the end of the evening, Samantha had learned a bit about Mark. He's a young professional in railway production with some kind of engineering speciality. "Not everyone needs to chase the market. Some of us need to do serious, complex and sometimes boring work to prevent civilization from stagnating." Mark had high aspirations, and he was confident he would succeed. He owned an apartment, inherited from his grandfather, but dreamed of building his own house. He was the only son in his family and preferred hard rock music over the pop music played in discos. Later that night, he walked Samantha home, and his respectful demeanour earned him the girl's mother's approval. She appreciated that he was polite and not like the modern guys. The day after, Samantha's friend Annie paid her an unexpected visit. "I was stunned when you ran away from the disco yesterday with Mark Rosenfeld. You should know he has something about him. He left with you just to anger his girlfriend Monica. She's my neighbour, the one many men are chasing. Monica kept Mark in a friend zone for nearly 2 years. I don't know why she needed him, probably just to increase her collection. Well, he is handsome, don't you think? He was serious and didn't realise he was just one of many. When she got bored with him, she stopped hiding her other suitors from him. Now, Mark is following her around, watching her. Probably to annoy her, to make her feel uncomfortable. But he's hoping in vain. It's nearly impossible to embarrass Monica. She's only amused by it all. I thought you might be interested, because what if you're hoping for something with him?" Samantha didn't anticipate anything special, but something made her sad. Whatever Annie said, Mark was a good guy. He was kind and considerate, entertaining her all evening, treating her to ice cream and expensive cakes and coffee. Since Monica had not seen his advances to Samantha, he could have done without them. Nevertheless, he arranged a pleasant evening for her. Samantha couldn't shake off her sadness for 2 full days. On the 3rd evening, the doorbell rang. Her mother, expecting her friend, opened the door to find Mark standing there with a small bouquet and a cake. From that evening, they began to go out together from time to time. Samantha quickly fell in love with him, angry at herself for this, and tried not to think about why he really needs her. Her mother tried to comfort her, saying, "Oh, Samantha, Don't pay attention to all the gossip. There are plenty of envious girls, but sincere friends are few. You can't help who you fall for. No one is forcing him to see you, but he visits you almost every day. It means he likes you. He compared you to his ex-girlfriend and realized you're better." Samantha listened to her mother in silence, objected to her only to herself, so as not to upset. She and Mark were still just friends. It lasted until Mark's birthday. Amidst the warm and windless July days, they celebrated the holiday at his family's country house. There were only Mark's parents and a friend from his university with his wife there. They had just returned from their honeymoon to the sea. For Samantha, this was the day she met Mark's parents. Her mother took it as a sign of the seriousness of Mark's intentions. As for Samantha, she didn't believe the relationship would last. She thought Mark would disappear as swiftly as he had appeared. If he didn't return to Monica, he'd find another woman. He was too handsome and promising for Samantha, and he must have known that. Her friends hinted at this, and Samantha herself thought the same, but deep down she still wanted to believe that her mother was right. That evening was the happiest she'd ever had. Both her father and mother and Mark's friend, Peter, liked her, and as the day turned into evening, her confidence grew that this day was special. Mark's parents went into town for the night. Peter and his wife Megan quickly secluded themselves in the prepared mansard, leaving Mark and Samantha alone by the outdoor fireplace. Mark seemed delighted with their solitude. He took out a bottle of expensive champagne, a birthday gift from his boss, and proposed they enjoy it alone. "Let's savour this luxurious treat," he suggested. Raising her glass, filled with effervescent bubbles, Samantha proposed a simple toast. "I'm so happy that it's you I love, Mark." "You are the best, the absolute best," he responded, and they spent their first night together. In the morning, after accompanying their friends, Mark drove Samantha home, but then returned in 5 minutes with a bouquet of burgundy roses. "Well, Samantha," slyly asked her mother, having ensured that her daughter's boyfriend had left, "you look happy. Did he propose?" "No, Mum, he didn't. But really, everything was wonderful." "Oh, I'm sure he will. I can see that," the mother promised confidently. 2 days later, the entire Rosenfeld family appeared on the doorstep of Samantha's home. Mark's father, while arranging delicacies on the table, announced that they were traditional people. So they decided to propose to Samantha in a domestic setting. However, the wedding would be in a restaurant, according to all the traditions. Back then, many girls still dreamed of a grand, large and formal wedding, but Samantha was not among them. She desired the kind of wedding her daughter Gail would have a quarter century later, simple, elegant, and only for the closest people. She also wanted a honeymoon trip that would be remembered for a lifetime. However, no one sought her opinion about her own wedding, and she didn't even notice it then. She was sitting at the table, discussing something with her mother and future mother-in-law, hardly able to believe that all this was happening to her. Her beloved Mark wanted her as his wife, and she was determined to ensure he'd never regret it. And so, a quarter of a century later, Mark and Samantha completed their married life. The man was again experiencing a long-lost feeling of happiness, and he was relieved that his divorce from his indifferent, aging wife was proceeding smoothly, much easier than he had anticipated. Samantha had let him go without any arguments, threats, or tears. Had she also stayed with him out of inertia for too long? This thought alleviated some of his guilt, but also pierced his ego. He had believed he was the centre of Samantha's world, yet she seemed to let him go without a second thought. Samantha kept her promise made on the day Mark left. She had no claims, as long as Gail's interests were respected. She looked at Mark without blame, like a fellow commuter on a crowded subway, as if he would soon make room. After they were declared divorced, she casually said, "Bye," and left. She didn't look like someone who was lost and unhappy, and Mark had the strange feeling that he didn't really know his ex-wife. I wonder how long she has been practicing this independent look. His friends called him a fool when they found out about his sudden life change. Some were blunt, others diplomatic, but the message remained the same. Mark didn't take offence because he felt he was right. They're simply envious. A single look at Alexa's photo is enough to spark the envy in every one of them. Or they just never experienced such a feeling, so they can't understand me. Mark convinced himself. He had been like that himself, thinking it was normal to come home to a familiar wife and age together unnoticed. They were all just living in a state of hibernation, but he had suddenly woken up. Mark, heeding his father's advice, never regretted marrying Samantha. He initially courted her to make Monica jealous. However, his value did not rise in the girl's eyes. Surprisingly, he wasn't upset and was grateful to Samantha for freeing him from the obsession that had consumed him for the past 2 years. In Samantha's company, Mark felt comfortable and confident, and the girl didn't demand anything from him. She merely enjoyed his company. His parents noticed the change in Mark. It was impossible not to. He stopped being irritable, no longer disappeared at night, established a routine, and reignited his interest in work and career. They had worried for 2 years about their son's infatuation with a girl who, in their opinion, only wanted to sell herself more expensive. Now they quietly celebrated the change, careful not to jinx unclear prospects by asking too many questions. Of course, Mark's mother made some inquiries. Their town wasn't so large that they couldn't find mutual acquaintances. "Do you remember my classmate who knits for people?" Mrs. Rosenfeld excitedly shared with her husband as he came home from work. "Her cousin is a dispatcher at the same depot where the girl our Mark is dating works in the personnel department. She says that Samantha is really nice and serious, and generally without any trouble." "We'll see," Dad responded, chuckling. "It's not our decision to make anyway." Mark usually avoided discussing his personal life with his father due to their differences, and because his father had never approved of his previous choices. However, after he introduced Samantha to his family on his birthday, his father said, "We need to talk, Sonny. Samantha is a decent girl, not worse than your ex. Your mother and I noticed the way she looks at you. If you marry her, you'll always feel welcome and be cared. Over time, you'll come to appreciate this. If I were you, I'd marry her right away. You won't regret it. You'll remember my words with gratitude when I'm gone. And trust me, other girls won't run away. You'll have enough for your lifetime, if you wish." And so Mark got married. His parents have passed away. If they were still alive, he might not have been able to face the turbulent changes in his life, because he would have had to keep his divorce from Samantha a secret forever. His parents, who loved Samantha as their own daughter, would never have accepted it. Sometimes he missed his parents, but he was relieved that his beloved Alexa wouldn't have to deal with the undeserved disapproval of his relatives. His only relative left was Gail, who didn't want to meet Alexa. "Alexa is just a few years older than you. You might have something in common," he suggested. "Dad, if I had to live with your girlfriend, I would find something in common with her to avoid negativity. But I don't see the need. I'm sorry. We might never meet in our lives. I think your girlfriend would be okay with that too. I've already agreed to Mum's request not to hurt your feelings or say mean things to you, which is challenging enough for me now. So please don't make my life more difficult." Mark understood. Gail had always been closer to her mother than him, but Alexa was upset about Gail's refusal to meet her. "I'm not even offended for myself, but for you. Your daughter doesn't seem to make even the slightest effort to understand her father's feelings. You have done and continue to do everything for her. It's so easy for her to accept an apartment share as a gift. yet doing something nice for her father seems like an insurmountable task. She looked genuinely upset, and Mark had to comfort her for quite a while. In the first 2 months of her newfound freedom, Samantha worked hard to change her old way of life, initially adopting the simplest methods. "Guys, how about I come over every weekend to spend the entire day with Naomi, studying and playing, while you two get some alone time?" she suggested. Gail and her husband declined the offer, intending to raise their daughter themselves. "Please don't take offence, Mum. We'd rather go out together sometimes." The cultural programme crafted for her by Gail and Hilary was intriguing, yet it somehow failed to impress Samantha. She felt out of place when her daughter or friend took her to the theatre or an art exhibit. Their attempts to entertain her fell flat, but Samantha tried to show genuine joy. "Listen, it feels like you're forcing yourself," Hilary remarked sharply. "You don't need to pretend for our sake. Consider what you truly want for yourself." "I just want to lounge with a book undisturbed," Samantha confessed. Eventually, her friend and daughter persuaded Samantha to take a vacation. Among Lena's numerous acquaintances, there was a travel agent with very favourable offers. In April, Samantha flew to Egypt for 10 days. Being away from home was like being on another planet, which made her extremely happy. She realised she hadn't been to the sea for 10 years. She used to go every year with Gail. However, when Mark started building a house, it consumed nearly all of their finances. Since then, Gail went to the sea alone, attending children's and youth camps. In Egypt, Samantha preferred to rest alone, avoiding noisy groups, and was content with her solitude. She returned home completely rejuvenated, readily shifting from relaxation to her routine. And then she realised she had almost forgotten about Tom's parents' 30-year wedding anniversary, happening the day after her return. Fortunately, her daughter, who greeted her upon her return, had it sorted out, and even had purchased the presents on their behalf. The wedding anniversary was decided to celebrate at the Lost in the Wood Manor House, which hardly came as a surprise to the invitees. Tom's parents, who were not fans of ostentatious restaurants and preferred nature, loved fishing, trekking and beautiful walks. Samantha breathed a sigh of relief upon learning that the event didn't require a meticulous selection of dress, heels, or elaborate hair and makeup. And instead of an extended preparation on the day of the anniversary, Samantha enjoyed a good night's sleep, a leisurely cup of coffee, and dressed comfortably in loose beige pants and a snow white. She chose to let her hair hang loose around her shoulders. "Well, whoever says women over 40 shouldn't have long hair can keep their opinion to themselves," she thought. She had forgotten how well her honey brown eyes complemented her tan. Samantha liked the reflection in the mirror. She couldn't precisely recall when this self-appreciation began, perhaps during a vacation, when she felt a heavy burden lift from her chest and found joy in simply living. A little more time passed, and for Mark, things became not so cheerful. It seemed that only recently he and Alexa had celebrated New Year, and it was already August. It was necessary to think about a vacation, to plan something interesting. But there was neither strength nor ideas. Mark was so exhausted from the last year, as he had never been exhausted since his senior year, when he combined work with business trips and his studies. But then he was just a young man, and such a regimen was easier for him. The worst part was that Alexa said once that he had transformed from a lively man to a dull and tedious person despite his efforts. The mention of efforts caught Mark's attention, as he felt he was the one and only putting in the efforts. He didn't mind Alexa's lifestyle, but he wished she'd understand that he couldn't always keep up with the eternal feast. "I'm not a showman, I'm a chief engineer of the project, honey," he used to joke. "Well, Alexa isn't to blame," Mark confided in his old friend Peter over a glass of whiskey. "She's sensitive, young, and desired a lively life filled with new experiences. She is relying on me to provide that. You know, I'm struggling to figure out where to take Alexa for the next New Year. We visited the Emirates in March, and we're going to visit Hawaii in September, and I can't afford 3 trips in a year. Plus, I have some house issues. You've become overly anxious, Mark. Love can be exhausting, and that's your case. You're as busy as a housewife with 3 kids, Peter remarked, slightly tipsy from the whiskey. Thanks for the support and advice, buddy, Mark responded, stung by the comparison. You're welcome. If not an old friend, who else will tell you the truth? Now, let's get back to the specifics. How do you want to celebrate New Year? I would have stayed home, Mark grinned. We would have invited you and Megan. We used to celebrate every year like that. What was wrong with that? We've already been invited, so I'm sorry. Listen, why don't you and your partner stay home together? You two shouldn't be tired of each other yet. Romantic music, candles, pillows, huh? We spent New Year's Eve at home last year because we didn't have an opportunity to book anything decent. With this divorce, you know it's been a mess. Alexa might get offended if we spend another New Year's Eve at home. Well, I've never had such a problem, to be honest. Peter waved his hands. I don't even know what to advise you. Listen, what if your Alexa goes back to work? She would definitely be less bored and appreciate simple recreation more. Oh, don't give me that look. I'm not suggesting she should be hauling weights, sitting behind the cash register at the supermarket, or monitoring a conveyor belt. Doesn't she have some kind of elegant profession? Didn't she have a life before you? She's not a schoolgirl after all. She worked in a flower shop, I told you. There. You might buy her a course for New Year's Eve to be a top-notch creative florist. It could land her a job in a cool place. I'm absolutely serious. This gift shows you genuinely care. Am I wrong? I'll think about it, Mark replied wearily. Over the years, finding common ground with his old friend had become increasingly difficult. They had less in common now than in their youth, but Mark wasn't prepared to completely cut ties with him. After meeting Peter, Mark had planned to visit his sick colleague, pick up some paperwork and discuss certain matters. However, he decided to postpone the visit. He wanted to go home, so he rescheduled the meeting for the next morning. On his way, he stopped at Alexa's favourite bakery in the wine shop. Driving home, he realised he had forgotten to inform Alexa that he wouldn't be home 2 hours early. Well, it would be a surprise. The light was on in the living room, but the soft, melodic voice echoed from the terrace. Alexa had a peculiar habit of chatting with her girlfriends in the evenings, sitting on the open terrace and staring the distant line of streetlights along the highway. This was understandable in the summer, but seemed less comfortable in the winter. Nonetheless, Alexa assured Mark she was fine. She would just put on her coat, slip her feet into her boots, and step out for a chat. I don't want my serious beloved man to overhear my silly chatting with my friends, she used to say with a shrug. A few times, Mark had overheard her because he was curious. He found out that these conversations were filled with trivial girl talk, sharing manicurist recommendations, discussing swimming pools, boasting about gifts. In these conversations, Alexa seemed content with her life, which pleased Mark. From then on, he didn't eavesdrop any more. Now, she was conversing against a backdrop of light, rhythmic music, oblivious to Mark's arrival. The man followed her voice, which resembled the sound of a bubbling brook, along the wall towards the terrace, picking up on individual words as he got closer. I think about him very often, right down to the most delightful details. What would happen if I decide? I fully understand that he can't give me anything but that. Yes, that's it. That's what I mean. Suni, I really don't want to be a foolish person who spoils everything for a fleeting thrill. Yes, you're absolutely right. That's why I haven't decided to meet him alone yet. And I probably never will. And I can't take that risk. You're right. I can't pretend that, well, I'll mess up somewhere. Mark may be a little old for me, but he's dependable. Yes, he has proposed to me. I agree. Such opportunities shouldn't be thrown away. You realise that when you hit 30. He'll definitely do everything for me, unlike those who insist on splitting a restaurant bill. Thanks for listening. Goodbye, Suni. Kiss you. The door snapped like a coffin board, and Alexa's light footsteps fell silent in the house. Mark stood, his forehead resting against the cold wall of his house, contemplating. When did it get so cold? It wasn't long ago that it was warm here. He was thankful for Alexa's chatting nature, otherwise he might have married her and signed over his house without a second thought. Gail would inherit the apartment, and her Tom was from a prosperous family. On the other hand, Alexa only had him, and she had subtly persuaded him to this point, making him believe it was his independent decision. He realized that he was the fool, having fallen into the age-old trap like many before him. Mark could not dare to go into his own house and throw his fiancé out like a stray cat. After all, he had been happy with her for a while, even if there was self-deception. Finally, Mark decided he would give her the money he had saved for a vacation in Hawaii. It was just enough for her to get by until she found a job. She could move back with her mother or find a thrilling new relationship. Finally, Mark took his courage and walked resolutely into the house, and then there was a great scandal. Left alone, Mark reached for the bottle of expensive sparkling wine he had bought at the wine shop. "Well," he muttered, "let's celebrate." He never believed in the law of the boomerang, thinking it was a consolation for losers. He thought that everyone gets what they can take for themselves, dismissing the rest as mystical. But now this mysticism had a place in his real life. What had Samantha felt listening to his phone conversation? Just 6 months had passed, and the boomerang had struck him. It was swift and unexpected. Fate had been kind. He hadn't had time to marry and invest heavily in Alexa's well-being. Samantha had been with him for a quarter of a century, always alleviating his weariness when he returned home. He had everything that constituted warm well-being, a state many only dream of. His father was right. He had never regretted his sensible, convenient choice. Now, without a father or mother or friends, there was only one place left on earth where he could go. He accepted he would do anything to stay. But not now, not in such a miserable state. He needed time to think things over, to sleep, to work, and to find the right words. A week had passed, and here Mark was standing in front of his ex-wife's house. He had left the keys to their apartment in the mailbox on the day he moved out, so he had to wait for Samantha to come home. Mark found a parking spot around the corner from a nearby office centre, left his car there and went for a walk. Samantha's probably helping Gail take care of Naomi right now, because Gail may have gone back to work. That would be very much like her. I haven't heard anything from her since the January. She hasn't called me, only wishing me a happy birthday via text message. Well, I'll make up for all this, go fishing with my son-in-law and help with Naomi. Gail doesn't know how to be angry for long and plays Snow Queen. She's very much like her mother. Mark realised he was on his 3rd cup of espresso. It was time to leave because Samantha must be home by now. For sure, lights were on in the kitchen and living room windows. Hesitant, Mark stood in front of the intercom, but after a couple of minutes the door opened. A thin, elderly lady with a small dog on a brightly coloured harness came out. Ignoring the woman's condescendingly mocking look, Mark entered the building. In a minute he found himself on the familiar 3rd floor, in front of the light grey door, and pressed the bell. Samantha opened the door almost immediately. Mark got the impression that she initially wanted to slam the door shut because he could enter, but then she seemed to change her mind. Mark hesitated to step over this until Samantha nonchalantly invited him in, asking, "Come in? What's wrong?" His ex-wife looked different, yet familiar. She had always been of average height and build, neither heavy nor light, but now she seemed airy and casual, embodying the grace of a young girl. The woman had applied a dark chocolate shade of makeup, which complemented her unusually warm eye colour and skin tone. Her hair was not in its typical sleek ponytail, but was loosely scattered over her shoulders, reminiscent of the models in Renaissance paintings. She wore a simple flowing burgundy knee-length dress with a daring neckline that accentuated her slender waist. It seemed that Samantha appeared 10 years younger. "You've become stunning," Mark said in amazement. "Yeah, thanks," Samantha replied without pretense, her honey brown eyes smiling politely, as if she had heard that every day of her life. She paused briefly, expecting him to say more, but he remained silent. Then gently and without irritation, she continued, "Listen, Mark, if you have important business with me, say it now. I'm expecting guests. You didn't call ahead, and I have my own plans. I can't spare much time right now, I'm sorry." "Could you forgive me?" he asked in a breath. "I forgave you a long time ago," Samantha answered with a peaceful smile. "Mark, did you join some secret society for your career that requires notarized forgiveness from ex-wives? You should call Gail more often. She may not admit it, but she misses you. Now, why are you here?" "I want our family back. I want to make things right. I was an idiot. I made the worst mistake, and I'll admit it. I understand that you need time. Think it over and let me know when I can visit." "I'm sorry things didn't work out for you and your young girlfriend. You were so enthusiastic. I didn't have the heart to call you a sneak or anything like that, and it doesn't make any more sense now. I have a man I love." "Look, we're adults," Mark began again. "You had every right to retaliate after my foolish prank. You certainly proved me wrong. Can we agree not to revisit these past misadventures?" "Mark, you've misunderstood me," Samantha replied. "Or rather, you didn't listen. I wasn't trying to prove anything or seek revenge. After all these years, you should know I wouldn't stoop to such pettiness. It's not a fling. I'm getting married." And that's how it happened. At the wedding anniversary, Samantha arrived early with her daughter, son-in-law and granddaughter. Tom always left early for lengthy trips, half-jokingly claiming that his girls would inevitably forget something, need to return, make multiple stops and take photos at scenic spots. More or less, that's how it unfolded, but it never hindered the family from arriving before the appointed time. Rachel and Adam, the perpetrators of the celebration, were discussing catering with the campground owner. Gail and Tom immediately went to inspect the meat for the barbecue. Meanwhile, Samantha and Naomi headed off to explore the lake. The little girl was running around her grandmother, who, after her leisurely vacation, was a little unused to the fast pace of life and let her guard down. The woman did not expect that there would be a rubber boat hidden in the gap between the reeds, nor did she expect Naomi to leap into it. The boat began to rock. Samantha froze in shock and was about to rush to rescue her granddaughter as a silent fisherman in fishing boots materialized from somewhere and gently pulled Naomi out of the boat. The girl was not frightened and not upset, only giggled and showed him her tongue. "Hello, please take her," said the man, handing Naomi over to Samantha. "Thank you," responded Samantha, coming out of her daze, and they shared a brief laugh. The fisherman had a tidy short beard, hair trimmed with silver, and cheerful grey eyes. "Excuse me," Samantha said to him, adding, "We're here for a wedding anniversary. We arrived early, so we are having adventures while waiting for the others." "Everyone here is like that," the fisherman replied, "including me. I'm James, a classmate of Adam." "I'm Samantha, the mother of their daughter-in-law, and this curious girl is Naomi, their granddaughter." Samantha introduced them both. From that moment on, she and James were together. They sat together, chatted about everything in the world, and only danced with each other on the creaky wooden terrace. Everyone took it for granted as if they had been a couple for a long time, which seemed both strange and delightful. They were comfortable with each other, not afraid to say or do something wrong that might ruin everything. In the evening, Rachel helped Samantha put their restless granddaughter to bed, who finally settled down. Covering the little girl with a blanket, Rachel spoke softly to Samantha. "James is a very good man. We used to interact daily in our university time, but then life took us to different cities. He's been living in another state for many years, yet we visit each other annually. His wife passed away 7 years ago, heart disease. I expect that's why they didn't have children. They didn't want to take the risk. James is alone, truly alone. Casual relationships aren't his style. He needs someone to care for him. He's self-sufficient, but his solitude doesn't make him happy. Adam and I decided to make a show of our wedding anniversary for a reason. We had a hunch something good would come out of it. You know, if someone had told me yesterday that I could be in this situation, I would have laughed incredulously." Samantha responded quietly. Naomi fell into a deep sleep, and both women returned to their guests. The wedding celebration carried on the next day. People divided into groups based on interests and scattered under the beech canopies, near the fireplace, or in the arbours at the forest's edge. James was rowing Samantha around the lake in a boat. Wrapped in a woolen blanket, she enjoyed the bright spring day. When the celebration was over, everyone went to their homes. James called daily and visited Samantha twice a month. The woman also visited him several times. During her last visit in early September, James tenderly slipped a beautiful ring onto Samantha's finger. "If you agree to marry me, consider this an engagement ring. If not, it's just a heartfelt gift," he declared. On her return, Samantha shared the news with her daughter. Despite her excitement, she tried to maintain a composed demeanour, considering all factors. "I've worked at this agency for so many years, Gail, and I know how difficult it is for women my age to find work in my field in another place. To employers, we're practically retirees. Not everyone sees the value we offer." "Mum, there are other recruitment agencies, and by the way, you've considered changing jobs multiple times. This could be your opportunity," Gail countered. "And you and Naomi." Samantha hesitantly put forth another argument that must have seemed significant. "You're used to me always being available if you need anything." "That's not a valid argument. I don't mean that your help isn't necessary. However, you know perfectly well that you're not so helpless as to make my young, beautiful mother a full-time grandmother. If we need to, we have Tom's parents here, but we don't have any in other very interesting cities, which is a pity. So a happy grandmother in another state means a personal tour guide on vacation. There's so much for Naomi to see when she gets a bit older. Mum, I'm joking, of course, but you should see yourself flying around completely enthralled. Don't pretend there's anything you care about more than your current love. It's completely normal, and we're all happy for you." After that conversation, Samantha wrote a resignation letter. That day after work, she awaited Hilary's visit, who had promised to bring a wedding hairstylist she knew. Despite her usual aversion to glamour, Lena had insisted. "You can go to your wedding even in a jumpsuit, but it would be a crime not to make a stylish hairdo out of your beautiful hair." Samantha laughed and agreed, looking forward to surprising James. However, that evening took an unexpected turn when her ex-husband showed up. "Samantha, I understand that you tried to escape your loneliness, but look, this incident turned out to be beneficial for both of us. You've blossomed, and I've learned to appreciate what I have instead of chasing illusions. We both know it's not wise to seek adventure at our age. We share so much in common. It won't be hard for us to start over. The house is finished. You'll love it. We could live there and rent this apartment out. Imagine, no more cramped space, and the woods are just a stone's throw away. We could go flower picking, which you love. In summer we can vacation by the sea, taking our granddaughter. Or it could just be the two of us, to rekindle our feelings. Everything has fallen apart, Mark. There's nothing to rebuild, Samantha said, without a trace of gloating or irritation. I'm grateful for the good times we had, for our wonderful daughter, even for this incident, as you call it. Before this I didn't truly know myself. What could I be? What kind of person could be with me? What happiness feels like? I could have lived my whole life without knowing. You must understand me, because you said something similar a year ago. I was wrong, Samantha. Aren't you afraid of being wrong, like me? I'm not afraid, Samantha replied with a quiet smile. Mark's eyes sparkled with cold anger, and the woman decided it was time for him to leave. She didn't want to trade insults. They had no place in her life now. But suddenly the doorbell rang and Hilary entered, accompanied by a tall, thin girl wearing a hat with a large pom-pom. Here we are, Hilary said from the doorway. This is Chloe, our wedding fairy, and this is Samantha, our bride. Oh, and this is Samantha's ex-husband. He must have come to wish his ex-wife happiness in her new marriage. Very modern. Hello, Mark. After shooting Hilary a look full of anything but goodwill, Mark grabbed his jacket from the hanger and left without looking back. He didn't remember how he ended up on the street, how he was driving home. However, not far from home, he was stopped for speeding. We exceed the speed limit, the traffic officer stated, the fact tiredly. I don't care about your fines, Mark replied indifferently. My ex-wife left me. I was on my way back to her. I thought she would be happy, forgive me, but she's getting married. That's a woman's fidelity. She was a decent woman who had a house, a job, a granddaughter in her head. What to speak of others? Mark had a desperate sudden urge to speak out to someone he didn't know. Getting home, Mark immediately called Gail, apologised for not calling for a long time, asked about Naomi, and when he could see them all. Maybe we can go out together somewhere, like a water park or something Naomi likes. Dad, did something happen to you? Gail asked immediately. Yes, daughter, and I need an ally in your face. There's just no one else to talk your mum out of doing a stupid thing. Not so long ago, you were such a romantic, putting your passion above everything else, sneered the daughter, with a tiny hint of gloating. Samantha's a smart woman, and smart people learn from other people's mistakes. Don't you want Mum and Dad to be together again, Gail? Mark continued to persuade his daughter. Daddy, Gail replied gently, let's be honest. I've outgrown the potential teenage trauma of parents divorcing. Your marriage has run its course. I'm really sorry you ended up with a woman like Alexa, but you're still a pretty good catch. However, if Mum agreed to return to you now, that would be a mistake. That's why I'd try to dissuade her. You were with her because it was convenient. She deserves to be loved. Now, she has that love. And I wish the same for you. I see. Now that you have a share in the apartment, you have no more need for a father, right? You ungrateful brat. The man hung up abruptly and turned off his phone. He didn't want to get up in the next morning, and moreover he couldn't. The hangover felt heavier after solitary drinking than after the same amount of alcohol consumed in a jovial gathering. Luckily, after a stimulating shower, Mark began to feel more alert. He switched on his mobile phone. Accustomed to holding positions of responsibility, he always felt the need to stay connected. Without communication, he felt detached from the world, fearing of missing something important. He spotted 13 unanswered calls, all from Alexa. Evidently, He hadn't been very persuasive when he asked her to leave his life. He simply couldn't be harsh with her. She possessed a unique ability to look at a man in a way that made him want to pamper her. And she could exploit this skill as long as there were fools like him around. Mark's thoughts were interrupted by a call. There she is again. Okay, I'm not going to run away like a boy, the man thought. Mark, don't just hang up, pleaded a melodious, angelic voice, which would have softened even a stone. Just listen to me. It could be important for you too. Alexa, it's unlikely you'll come up with something new to convince me. Trust has been lost. Let's not waste time. But I am pregnant. Alexa sobbed into the phone desperately. And I haven't been with anyone else. No one but you. Sure, I've had fantasies, but I've never acted on them. Who hasn't? I would never cheat on you. I didn't know about the baby when you kicked me out. Yesterday, I took a test and found out. You can take a DNA test to confirm it's your baby. Hold on a minute. Mark managed to interrupt. Do you want to keep the baby? Yes, I do. It's time for me, and I really want to. So you're calling to get financial support for the baby? No, I need his father. He needs his father, Alexa cried. Alexa, quit the theatrics. I'm not pretending. I genuinely want things to improve between us. I promise I won't lie to you again. And with a baby, I won't have time to be silly. Alexa was raised single-handedly by her mother, who showered her with affection and dressed her like a doll. Her mother was a skilled seamstress, working flexible hours and taking orders at home. From the age of 3, Alexa was enrolled in dance classes and various extracurricular activities. Other than dancing and singing, Alexa showed little interest in anything else. Her academic performance was average, but her charm and ability to lift the spirits of even the sternest teachers often earned her higher grades. Alexa grew into a beautiful, artistic girl with a graceful figure. With her looks, she could have become an actress, but she lacked the determination required. She was only interested in what came easily to her, and the idea of exerting effort towards a goal often led to bouts of ennui. If it's so hard, it's not worth it, she used to think. Alexa's mother worried that her daughter would repeat her own fate by falling into a fleeting romance and ending up alone with a child. She urged her sincerely and patiently, saying, Alexa, neither of us have money or connections, nor any special talents or ambitions. But you're beautiful, sweet and easygoing. Everyone likes you. That's a valuable asset. You only need to make one wise decision in choosing a husband who will care for you, so you don't end up toiling endlessly like I do. There's nothing glamorous about such a life. Understanding algebra and chemistry was challenging for Alexa, but she grasped her mother's advice instantly. She politely, sweetly and sympathetically turned down any suitor who couldn't provide a secure life. Occasionally she felt upset and even spent a month or 2 wallowing. She liked some of the boys quite a lot, but her mother's life and those of many women around her served as a stark reminder. Love doesn't last forever, and what follows is a struggle with life's hardships, either alone or with a partner. She didn't dream of winning over a wealthy man, and didn't believe in such fairy tales. Being a practical person, she would be content with a well-to-do man, who stood firm on his own 2 feet, someone she could completely trust. She avoided casual flings to protect her reputation. The city might seem vast, but is it really? By the age of 30, she had only 2 relationships, both more or less aligning with her plans, but in both cases the presence of wives and underage children derailed her plans. Despite these setbacks, Alexa remained undeterred. After meeting Mark Rosenfeld, she knew he was the one. He had visited her floral shop for an original bouquet for his boss's wife, whose birthday party he was going to attend. "This isn't a corporate event, but a personal celebration," he explained to Alexa, helping her to understand what type of bouquet he needed. Alexa liked the visitor. She had her principles and refused even promising matches if the man didn't seem pleasant. Now she smiled and moved so that he would definitely come again. She considered herself fortunate. Mark's daughter was already married, and his wife was of a type that Alexa didn't find threatening. It is only necessary to behave correctly to finally grow up and not fall for young fitness instructors and other seekers of entertainment. She also thought having a child wouldn't be a bad idea. She really liked kids. A month after Alexa's call, Mark was sitting with his friend at a bar. "What can I tell you?" Peter mused. "This situation isn't the worst for you. The feeling of not being needed by anyone is probably much worse. Your parents are gone, your ex-wife and daughter are happy without you, and now you're becoming a father again. Late fatherhood is often the most fulfilling. What if you have a son? You've always envied me for having 2 boys. You'll take care of him, become the favourite, authoritative daddy, the big boss. I'm not saying you should live with his mother, but that's up to you. But I can't believe that all your love for her evaporated at once." Leaving the bar, Peter took a cab home, while Mark chose to walk to clear his head from the brandy haze. The bar was in the city centre, near train station square. Mark felt drawn to walk through the bustling crowd. A train seemed to have recently arrived, the people carrying luggage entering the square, eagerly chatting with their welcoming parties. Suddenly, Mark spotted Samantha. She was wearing a stylish crimson jacket and looking youthful. A tall, bearded man gently held her by the shoulders. Mark paused underneath a lantern, and they noticed him. "Hi, Mark," said Samantha with a casual air. "Hi, Samantha. My congratulations upon your upcoming wedding. And I'm about to become a father." "Wow, that's great." Samantha's companion smiled broadly and genuinely. "Then we extend our congratulations to you too." "Thanks. Well, I'll return to my family now." Mark waved and disappeared into the crowd. "Who was that slightly inebriated and melancholic gentleman?" James humorously raised an eyebrow. "My ex-husband," Samantha replied. "If he's telling the truth, I'm happy for him." "Well then, I'm glad for him too. I owe him for being so stupid and leaving you alone." After watching them get into the cab, chattering and laughing, Mark went up to another cab and said Alexa's address. Tyler was walking slowly down the white steps, some of them cracked from time, to the river. He bundled himself in an old down jacket, bracing against the chilly grey November, the biting wind and icy particles falling from the sky. Here, near the river, winter's approach was palpable, the temperature significantly lower than in the city. Pulling his knitted hat over his ears, Tyler reminded himself he could not afford to get sick. Illness would mean additional spending from his very frugal savings. Such was the life of a poor and misfortunate person. Tyler had experienced worse times, even sleeping on heating mains and scavenging food from garbage dumps. Despite these hardships, he'd managed to somewhat stabilize his life. Although the dream of owning a corner was still far off, his current situation was markedly better than before. Tyler was raised in a small village, surrounded by beautiful aspen groves. He recalled his childhood as the happiest and most comfortable period of his life, often looking back with nostalgia. It wasn't merely the physical comforts, such as a roof over his head, clean sheets or a guaranteed meal each day, that he missed. It was the love he received and the fact that he wasn't alone. His gentle and kind grandmother Rachel was central to these memories. She was wise, forgiving, and warm. Tyler perceived her as omnipotent for a long time. She always knew what to say to soothe his worries and anxieties. She understood how to handle any situation and was respected by her neighbours, seeming to know everything in the world. She also seemed tireless. Tyler could not recall ever seeing her sleep. She was always busy with chores when he went to bed, and by the time he woke up, she was already up and about, freshly groomed and smiling. Rachel was a strong woman, tall, stately and energetic. Later on, Tyler deeply missed his grandmother's presence, her comforting gaze, warm embraces, and soothing voice. He used to weep over his inability to change the past, blamed himself and cried helplessly into the void. Hopelessness. That's how Tyler would describe his state. The loss of his home didn't terrify him. He was relatively uninterested in that. What mattered was his grandmother. She was gone. Tyler had no other relatives. It was just the way things were. In the village, where almost everyone had some form of in-laws, cousins, aunts and uncles, or distant relatives, it was unusual, but that's how it was. Tyler's grandmother came here as a young woman, following her husband, named Tom. He was a hard-working and skillful man who was respected at his job at the sawmill and by his neighbours. Rachel worked as a milkmaid on a farm, and they got along well and lived harmoniously. Both dreamed of having a large family with at least 5 children. However, they only had one child, a daughter named Eva. They planned to have more children, but as the years passed, Eva remained their only child. Eva grew into a beautiful girl who looked nothing like her parents. They were simple rustic folk, while she had delicate features, a slender figure, large violet eyes and golden curls. She was like a princess. The locals often joked about whether Rachel had secretly brought such a beauty from the city. However, Tom never doubted his wife's fidelity. The girl's character matched her appearance, languid, capricious and self-loving. When Eva recognized her attractive appearance, her pride intensified. Her parents were simple, hard-working people. Their family's lifestyle was no different from others, yet Eva believed she deserved more. She aspired to live in a big city and blamed her parents for not moving there earlier. She demanded toys, outfits and jewellery from her parents and refused to do housework, claiming she needed to study, not sweep floors, as she did not plan to stay in the village for long. However, Eva's studies were unconventional. She did not focus on school subjects, but on imitating the models she saw in magazines. She experimented with makeup and fashion, striving for perfection. She taught herself how to combine various wardrobe elements and style her golden hair differently. This all began when she was around 14 years old, perhaps even earlier. "I'll move to the city, become a photo model, maybe even go abroad. I certainly won't live in this swamp," she declared. Rachel and Tom looked at each other confused. They blamed themselves for their daughter's attitude, but they couldn't pinpoint where they had gone wrong. Rachel had grown up in stark poverty and had always gone hungry, so she may have overcompensated by indulging her only daughter. Tom, having been raised almost without any parental love, was naturally spoiling his long-awaited child as well. Nevertheless, they tried to instill basic moral and ethical principles in Eva. They taught her the importance of work and respect for others. Rachel showed her daughter how to bake pies and clean the house. Yet even as a child, Eva rejected these values, making it clear she yearned for a different life. During her teenage years, Eva's contempt for her parents intensified. She dismissed them as losers who knew nothing about life. "You have no right to teach me," she would shout at her parents when they tried to guide her. "You've achieved nothing. Both of you work for pennies. But I'm not like you. I want a different life. I'll marry a rich man or become a model." Tom tried to reason with her. "Who'll marry you? Such an unprepared girl. You can't cook or clean. Your mother still takes care of you." Eva retorted, "I won't marry a village fool. I'll marry a rich man Who has servants to do all that? Indeed, Eva had plenty of admirers. As a beautiful girl, she attracted attention not only from her male classmates, but also from older men. This deeply alarmed her parents. Rachel and Tom tried to talk to her, but she merely laughed in response. In an attempt to protect her, Tom used to lock her at home, but Eva always found a way out, either through the window or by slipping out when her parents were distracted. She craved admiring glances and compliments. These things bolstered her self-confidence and her own belief in her own irresistibility, reinforcing her conviction that she deserved a better life. Eva dreamed of achieving this better life effortlessly. She had no interest in studying at school or college, considering it a long and difficult path, meant for those not fortunate enough to be born beautiful, with large violet eyes and golden curls. All of this, growing up, little Tyler was told about by their neighbour, Mrs. Peterson. She used to call his mother as a naughty girl. As for Rachel, she never spoke ill of her daughter. She only often sighed about her fate and blamed herself for failing to properly guide her. On the contrary, Mrs. Peterson always spoke the unvarnished truth, never attempting to soften the harsh realities. Your mother was a beauty, I admit, but she was lazy. She wasn't very smart either. She aspired to reach great heights, but lacked the intellectual capacity. Hence, things turned out the way they did. It's not your grandparents' fault. They did everything they could for their daughter. They're good people. It's probably just genetics, likely from Tom's family. He was raised in an orphanage. And who sends children in such places? Only people like Eva. If it hadn't been for your grandparents, you would have been raised in an orphanage too. After school, Eva didn't want to pursue further studies. Therefore, her parents got her a job as a clerk in the local store. The girl kept living a monotonous life, still dreaming of a better future. Eva harboured resentment towards her circumstances, her parents, and the limitations of village life. She felt her dreams were unfulfilled. Despite her desire to escape to the city, her parents dissuaded her. Eva would have fled without a second thought if she had had the means and destination. She tried to get into modelling by sending her photos to an agency. However, to her surprise, she received no response. And then one day, a city guy named Paul visited their village. He came with a local friend to visit his parents. Paul was a university student and drove his own car, a gift from his father when he came of age. Handsome and stylish, Paul was like an actor from a youth show. Naturally, Eva was instantly attracted to him, and her rustic charm bewitched Paul, and they quickly became involved. It was Paul who took Eva to the city, and she moved into his apartment. While Paul studied, Eva became like a housewife, even cooking and cleaning to secure her place in the city. Thanks to Paul's father's money, they led a carefree and fun life, partying in clubs and restaurants, and even going on trips. Tom naturally travelled to the city in an attempt to bring his daughter home, but she refused to return. Since Eva was of legal age, she had every right to do so. Paul was her knight on a black Audi, who whisked her away from her despised village and judgmental parents. This was Eva's perception of her escape. She had finally broken free. However, her relationship with Paul didn't last long. He quickly found someone else, but Eva had no intention of returning to the village. She found a new love interest, not as affluent as Paul, but it was better than nothing. Despite the failure of this relationship too, another prospect was on the horizon. With time, Eva lowered her standards in suitors. The men came and went, but one thing remained constant. She lived off them, offering them her affection, youth and beauty in exchange for shelter, food, gifts and outings. Eva's life wasn't exactly as she had envisioned, but she still had no plans of returning to the village. Tom and Rachel were devastated to see their daughter's transformation. Eva's once vibrant golden curls had faded, her voice had become rough and hoarse, and her skin had assumed an unhealthy pallor. She started drinking heavily and smoking, which inevitably took a toll on her health and appearance. Tom was deeply concerned about the destructive path his only daughter had chosen. It was a significant shock for a father. Rachel held on to the hope that Eva would come to her senses, grow weary of her lifestyle and different men in her life. And besides, these men weren't wealthy, handsome men like Paul, but more akin to shabby, marginal-looking individuals. But they had jobs and money, which enabled Eva to live in the city at their expense. Eva had transformed from a golden-haired princess into a shabby woman with traces of disadvantage and vices in her appearance. It was difficult to imagine her former self. Now she was spiralling downhill, seemingly oblivious to her decline. Tom's heart ached for his daughter, causing him to suffer 2 successive heart attacks. Rachel was also distressed, but she clung to the hope that Eva, still young, could turn her life around. Tom, however, seemed resigned to the belief that nothing good would come from Eva's current path. But he didn't survive his 3rd heart attack, leaving Rachel alone in their village house. Her husband was gone, and her daughter lived a rowdy life in the city. This wasn't how Rachel had imagined her old years. At least, she had her job. She worked as a milkmaid on a farm, where she could socialize and escape the loneliness of her home. On New Year's Eve, something unexpected happened. Eva came to visit her. Upon seeing her, Rachel immediately started bustling around, preparing the table. Eva looked unwell, thin, pale, and with a puffy face. When Eva removed her jacket, Rachel noticed her round belly underneath her sweater. Eva was pregnant, seemingly far along. The baby's father was another of Eva's suitors, a truck driver. He earned decent money and spent it on hanging out when he wasn't on the road. His girlfriend's pregnancy was unplanned. When he found out, he panicked, confessing he already had a family in another city, a wife and 2 children. He didn't want another child, but the doctor refused to terminate the pregnancy because it was too late. After the news, her admirer fled in a disappointingly ordinary manner. Eva continued to live in the apartment for a few more months until the lease expired. Therefore, Eva found herself without suitors, their money, and had to return to her hometown. Rachel was hopeful. She believed that, even without a father, the child would grow to be successful. She anticipated that motherhood would evoke tenderness and care in Eva. However, things did not pan out as expected. The baby was born prematurely, frail and tiny. He spent a month in an ICU for the newborns. Eva decided to give up on him because she perceived him as a burden, especially since he was sickly. She left the child at the hospital and returned to the city, ready to resume her old lifestyle. Upon learning about Eva's actions, Rachel rushed to the hospital. With her connection to an employee there, she managed to nullify Eva's waiver. However, they still needed Eva's presence and signature for the baby's documents. Initially, Eva was adamant about not wanting her son, suggesting that the orphanage was a better option. But Rachel persuaded her that the boy should stay in the family. She reasoned, "I will take care of him. You can live your life, and you will receive a decent allowance as a single mother according to the documents." Rachel took such a step for her grandson. If not for the opportunity of using child benefits, Eva would never have agreed to leave the baby, and Rachel would have never been granted guardianship. Hence, little Tyler stayed with his grandmother in the village. He only knew about his mother, the beautiful Eva, from his grandmother's stories, neighbours' accounts, and photographs. Eva showed little interest in her son's life, only periodically visiting her mother to rest between her complicated love affairs. In Tyler's memory, she remained as a vague image, a woman with a strange smell, hoarse, noisy, and unpleasant. She used to shout at his grandmother, demanding something from her. and little Tyler was always scared. However, it didn't last long, as Eva passed away when he was barely 4. Her next cohabitant in a drunken brawl did not calculate his strength, and the final of Eva's life was very logical. In the years that followed, Rachel often told Tyler that she was able to survive that difficult period after Eva's passing, thanks only to her little grandson, whom she had to care for. Tyler and his grandmother lived modestly. The times were tough, and his grandmother's salary didn't afford luxuries yet. Tyler thought of his childhood as happy. He had a caring grandmother, friends, a comfortable bed, and the aroma of pies and fried potatoes. He didn't have an expensive computer or branded sneakers, but he never went hungry or wore rags. Tyler tried to assist his grandmother in every way possible. As he grew, he understood that her life was not easy. He tried to bring her as much joy as he could. Unfortunately, he struggled with his studies. His grandmother helped him and tried to explain complex topics, but he had difficulty understanding. "That's because Eva drank when she was pregnant with him," remarked Mrs. Peterson, the grandmother's neighbour. They were in the kitchen, thinking Tyler couldn't hear them. "Oh, what difference does it make?" Rachel retorted. "The main thing is, he's healthy, strong and kind. Not everyone needs to be a scientist. Tyler will find his place in life. Just like his grandfather. He's very handy." Tyler indeed was a handyman. Whether it was fixing or creating something, he was the person for the task. No one specifically taught him these skills. He learned by observing others and picked it up quickly, unlike mathematics. By the time Tyler finished school, his small family's financial situation had significantly deteriorated. The earnings from the farm were minimal, and his grandmother's pension was a pittance compared to the ever-rising costs. To supplement their income, Tyler took on odd jobs, repairing neighbours' fences, mowing lawns, digging land in the gardens, and even assisting in house construction. However, these jobs were sporadic and paid little. Given his unimpressive grades, college seemed out of the question. Despite this, Tyler decided to move to the city, hoping to find better earning opportunities and improve his life. He felt obliged to support his grandmother financially, as she had already sacrificed a lot for him. "Go," his grandmother said to him. "You're responsible and resilient. I'm less worried for you than I was for Eva. You'll find your way. Just be careful. You're still young and the world is full of dangers." "Don't worry, Grandma," Tyler consoled her, wrapping his arms around her shoulders. "Everything will be fine. I'll work at a construction site as a labourer. I can mix cement, lay bricks, plaster and paint. I can do it all. When I'm back on my feet, I'll move you into town." Grandma smiled, her eyes tinged with sadness. Despite her assurances that Tyler would be fine, she seemed to have a sense of impending trouble. Initially, the city overwhelmed Tyler. The bustling crowds and streams of cars were a stark contrast to his previous visits. He had visited the city with his grandmother for shopping or paperwork, but living alone in this bustling metropolis was a different story. He was unsure of where to start. Prior to his move, Tyler had found several job advertisements. Construction sites were frequently hiring, so he decided to apply. His skills were a welcome addition to a team constructing a supermarket. The project was nearing completion, and they needed help with the finishing work. Tyler was a perfect fit. He even received accommodations, a small trailer house, which he shared with the other workers, but it was free. Upon receiving his first paycheck, Tyler promptly rented an apartment. He was considering job hunting again when work found him. One of his roommates from the construction site offered him a job on a new project. "They pay well," the man assured him, "but only when the work will be done." Tyler didn't mind this arrangement, since he used to trust people. He had saved money from his previous job, so he wasn't anxious about his living expenses. With the work progressing well, he looked forward to earning well and helping his grandmother. He knew she had debts from borrowing money to send him to the city, with some cash in hand. Soon he would be able to repay her, and even give her a little extra. She would be thrilled. But the deal didn't go as planned. This time, the owners blatantly exploited the workers and disappeared with their money. There was no use contacting the police or the Labour Inspectorate, as there were no official agreements or contracts, and nobody would take the workers' word. Tyler found himself in a dire situation. His savings were gone. He couldn't afford his apartment rent, and barely had money for food. He tirelessly scoured the city for work, but to no avail. There was no demand for unskilled labourers at the moment. One day, after another unsuccessful job search at a construction site, Tyler was walking towards the bus stop, feeling a mix of fear, despair and resentment. Suddenly he heard, "Hey, man, are you looking for work?" Tyler turned around to see two men, around 25, tall and tanned. They were obviously construction workers due to their weathered, tanned faces and broad, dirt-covered hands. "Yes," Tyler nodded. "Why?" "We need helpers, just to move some stuff from a cottage into a car. The work is simple, and the pay isn't bad." Doubt crept into Tyler's mind. What if it's a scam again? He didn't want to make the same mistake twice. He was eager to find an official job, and for this he should stay in the city, which meant paying rent and buying food. So Tyler decided to take a risk. "I'm in," he said. "All right," his interlocutor responded. "We'll meet here tonight at 11 o'clock. 11 o'clock at night? Tyler asked, finding it odd. Why so late? The owners leave late. We follow them into the house, start clearing it out. They don't want to be involved in all this fuss, which is why they pay well. Tyler shrugged. The wealthy had their peculiarities. I will be, he promised his new acquaintances. When the time came, Tyler was at the designated spot. The men he'd met earlier were late, or perhaps they wouldn't show up at all. Tyler wouldn't mind. He needed the money, but these men seemed shady. There was a lack of sincerity, a falseness about them. Tyler was really afraid that they would cheat him, not pay him, just like on the previous job. Nonetheless, 10 minutes later the guys arrived in an old, broken-down truck. The driver's door opened and one of Tyler's daytime acquaintances peered out. Why are you standing there? Get in! We're already late. Tyler complied and settled into the seat next to the driver. The other man was there too, offering a quiet hello before returning his gaze to the window. Unlike his companion, this second man was silent and stern. They drove for nearly an hour, first through the city, then onto the highway, and finally onto a rough country road. Tyler's suspicion grew with every passing minute, but he realized that it was unlikely he could extricate himself from the situation quickly or easily. At best, these two might leave him penniless in the middle of nowhere. He didn't dare think about the worst-case scenario. The driver intermittently cracked jokes and flashed smiles. Tyler sensed he was putting on a brave front, attempting to appear calm and composed, but was internally anxious. The other man remained as silent as ever, not responding to his friend's remarks, just focusing on the road. Eventually, the truck halted near a house enclosed by a high fence. The driver unlocked the gate with a key. Tyler exhaled in relief. Since the driver had a key, things were probably okay. You stay in the yard, we'll go inside, the driver instructed. We'll hand you the boxes, you put them in the truck. We'll be finished in no time. The men hid in the house. Tyler noticed they also had a key to the front door. It was silent and dark, the way only the countryside can be. Large stars peered down from the sky. Tyler couldn't help but admire the night sky, as it reminded him of his own village and of his grandmother. I wonder what she's doing now, probably having tea with Mrs. Peterson in her cosy kitchen. They're likely talking about me, he thought. He yearned to return home, to the only person he truly knew. He longed to be a little boy again, viewing his grandmother as a loving and all-powerful figure. His pleasant thoughts were interrupted by the driver's gruff voice. What are you daydreaming about? You're standing here like a statue. Grab the box. Tyler dutifully hauled the heavy box into the truck. I wonder what's inside. Books, dishes, or just some household items? He pondered. No sooner had Tyler stepped back onto the porch than the silence of the September night was shattered by the wail of a police siren. The darkness was pierced by the glow of a flashing beacon. Tyler hoped the police cars would continue past the station to an accident scene, but instead they halted right outside the gate. Everything happened rapidly. The garden was quickly filled with uniformed people. Some officers rushed into the house, others began searching the truck. Tyler was easily thrown to the ground as if he weighed nothing. His arms were painfully twisted behind his back, dry grass tickling his face, sand filling his nose and mouth. He sneezed once, then again. Breathing became difficult. Someone roughly turned Tyler's face to the side, and he took greedy gulps of air. Later in the police station, Tyler was sitting handcuffed on a hard bench with uniformed men on either side. There was no sign of the driver or the other man. They seemed to have escaped. Tyler inferred this from snippets of conversation between the law enforcement officers. "Where are your accomplices?" a sturdy man in camouflage asked Tyler. "Do you know where they went?" Tyler shook his head. He wanted to explain that the escapees weren't his accomplices, that they'd only met that morning. They had simply offered him a job because he desperately needed the money. But he remained silent. For one, they wouldn't believe him. He had rehearsed his speech in his head, and it sounded unlikely. Secondly, his tongue felt foreign from fear, as if it were far too large and immovable. His mouth was also dry. He was thirsty, but he didn't dare ask the police for water. "Do you know whose house you were going to rob?" the man in camouflage asked again. "Prosecutor Hamilton's." "That's whose. Idiot. You'll face the full consequences now." Tyler was then interrogated by an investigator, a middle-aged man with a tired, angry look, who questioned him as though he were a hardened criminal. Tyler told the truth, but was not believed, understandably. After all, the other two had fled and vanished. They were being sought after, and Tyler had assumed that the police would not be successful. Now he was convinced he had encountered seasoned criminals. It turned out the truck used by the thieves had been stolen, and the police decided to blame this on Tyler as well. His protests that he didn't know how to drive fell on deaf ears. "I don't even have a license." "It's easy to verify," he tried to argue. "And we have half the country driving without a license. It's not a hindrance," was the answer to him. The trial occurred surprisingly quickly, mere days after the arrest. Tyler, the defendant, didn't anticipate seeing his grandmother there, but she had been informed in time. Despite knowing his innocence, he couldn't meet her gaze out of shame, fearing she saw him as a criminal. His grandmother seemed thinner and older, her face marked by shadows and wrinkles. Her anxious gaze was tinged with sadness, yet filled with love. She looked at Tyler without judgment, her tenderness giving him strength. As the judge announced the verdict, Tyler's world dimmed. He had braced for conviction but hoped for a more lenient sentence, even house arrest, considering he wasn't a repeat offender. But the judge's verdict was ruthlessly 6 years in a prison. The grandmother gasped, clutching her heart, her eyes turning grey. "What is this? He's practically a child. Adult criminals confused him, tricked him, and escaped. It's clear as day." Tyler was sent to a penal colony in another region. Long grey days stretched on, each resembling the last. His routine consisted of waking up, having a meagre breakfast, working in the industrial zone, walking in the cramped prison yard, undergoing occasional searches and inspections, eating lunch and dinner, having a periodic medical examination, and observing occasional holidays for the prisoners. His life was filled with dull monotony, a peculiar odour, dirt, despair, and fear. Luckily, Tyler's cellmates were more humane than the guards. Each had their own complex fate. As the youngest, Tyler was pitied in a way. They understood that he was simply unlucky to have encountered such dangerous people at a young age. Now, Tyler had plenty of time to reflect. He was learning about life and people in this harsh environment. He realized how naive and foolish he had been. If given the chance, he would not make the same mistake again, but there's no point in regretting after the fact. Sometimes Tyler's grandmother visited him. Each time he noticed new wrinkles on her face. As he grew from a boy into a man, his grandmother was aging. He knew that his grandmother now had heart problems. He also knew that he was the cause of her illness. His actions had caused her worry, leading to her serious health problems. Tyler knew she had tried to appeal for leniency for him several times, even hiring lawyers, but it was to no avail. Tyler was given the maximum punishment, primarily because the victim was the prosecutor, who was known for their influential connections. Over those 6 years, Tyler often wished he could go back to that fateful day and refuse the offer from the two strangers to earn money. His life could have turned out differently. "It's all right, grandson. Everything happens," his grandmother reassured him. Tyler tried to put on a brave face, but Rachel saw and understood everything. "You've been deceived. It happens to everyone. The price is high, but it's just the beginning of life. You'll recover. Everything will be all right." Tyler smiled. His grandmother's words lightened and warmed his soul. It started to feel like everything would work out. Most importantly, he had someone who loved him, waited for him, and would never deceive or abandon him. Then his grandmother suddenly stopped visiting him. Tyler became worried when she didn't show up for his birthday. She always made it a point to visit on his birthday, but this time she was absent. Her phone went unanswered. All his attempts to get in touch with his beloved granny were in vain, with only a long beep on the other end. Finally, Tyler was called to the visiting room. He rushed in, relieved, already imagining hugging his grandmother and telling her how much he missed her. However, sitting on the familiar grey sofa was their neighbour, Mrs. Peterson, who looked tense and worried. At that moment, Tyler felt the ground slip from beneath his feet. He instantly knew that something terrible had happened. "Oh, Tyler," whispered Mrs. Peterson, awkwardly hugging her neighbour. "You've grown taller, but you've lost weight. Don't they feed you here?" With a trembling voice, and periodically wiping her eyes with a handkerchief, Mrs. Peterson delivered the dreadful news to Tyler. "Rachel is dead. She had a heart attack and the ambulance didn't arrive in time. She was so looking forward to your return, and she had made so many plans." Mrs. Peterson sobbed. It was clear that she was still grappling with the loss of her friend and neighbour. Neighbours arranged the funeral. It seemed like someone tried to get Tyler permission to say goodbye to his grandmother, but he was neither allowed to attend the event, nor was he informed of the tragedy. "How can this be? How can I come home and she's not there?" Tyler muttered in disbelief. "I'm very sorry, Tyler, but you have no home to return to," Mrs. Peterson said, looking at Tyler with a confused expression. "You don't know, do you?" It turned out that after Tyler was incarcerated, Rachel took out loans, hoping that good lawyers could get her beloved grandson out of jail. But even with good lawyers, nothing worked. The loans were secured against the house, and when the owner died, the property was taken over by the bank. The second blow was less shocking than the first, but it still hurt. Tyler's house was more than just a building. It was his sanctuary, filled with pleasant memories. The thought of someone else living there was unsettling. After that, Tyler felt lonely and unwanted. With no grandmother, he wondered about his purpose. He had always thought it was to care for his grandmother in her old age. But now, what was it all for? Regardless, he had to keep living. Tyler adjusted to the cold and darkness that engulfed him. He ate, slept, and worked automatically, constantly plagued by childhood memories of a young, stronger grandmother. He had promised to support her in his old age, but she never lived to be old. Freedom did not bring the anticipated joy, but instead confusion. He was overwhelmed with questions. Where to go? What to do? Where to sleep? Where to eat? Fortunately, his years of work in the workshop at the prison had earned him some money and skills. With all this, he headed to the city. He knew no one was waiting for him in the village. Although Mrs. Peterson had offered to take him in after his release, he understood that it was only out of politeness. Why would she want a criminal in her house? In the city, Tyler's money quickly depleted within a week, spent on hostel stays and food. Then, challenging times began. He experienced homelessness and resorted to scavenging from trash bins. A few times, Tyler felt so ill that he believed he wouldn't survive. However, his youth allowed him to recover again and again, and his unfulfilling, joyless life persisted. Tyler was disgusted by the person he had become, a destitute vagrant. This was not the life he had envisioned for himself as an adult. He could only imagine his grandmother's disappointment. Then one day, while passing by a construction site, Tyler noticed a tiler incorrectly installing tiles and gave him advice on how to do it easier and better. The tiler was initially skeptical of Tyler's advice, but upon following it, he was pleased with the result. And the unbelievable happened. Tyler was offered a job. Of course, he jumped at the opportunity. The foreman's name was Jorge, and he ran a small construction and installation team. His team engaged in minor repairs and small building projects, needed capable workers. Tyler was thrilled to have steady work after years of hardship. Jorge valued Tyler's diligence and skill. Learning with time about his past, Jorge acted as his mentor and helped Tyler with various aspects of life, including paperwork, major purchases, and medical needs. He also advised Tyler to start saving for a place of his own, underscoring that a man needs his own space, even if it's a modest apartment in a remote area. Tyler began to save money, gradually, month by month. He kept his savings in a secret pocket he had made in his shirt. Upon discovering this, Jorge explained, "Are you crazy? Who does that?" Confused, Tyler replied, "Where else should I keep it? Like buried treasure in the forest?" "Not like buried treasure, but in a bank." "We'll open an account," Jorge proposed. Tyler was initially reluctant to entrust his hard-earned money to a bank, having been deceived numerous times in the past. However, Jorge managed to convince him. As a result, Tyler, who was once homeless, now had his own bank account that he regularly deposited into. The balance kept growing, and he hoped to someday use it to buy a house in the village or an apartment. Living in the hostel introduced Tyler to various people with fascinating, sometimes complicated, or even scary life stories. The hostel inhabitants, reminiscent of train fellow travellers, freely shared details of their lives. One day a new neighbour came to the room. He was a man slightly older than Tyler, accompanied by a boy of about 6 years old. The child and the man bore a striking resemblance, with the same green eyes, a sly squint, copper red hair, and freckles on their faces and hands. It was clear that they were father and son, Darrell and little Jacob. Like most permanent residents of the hostel, they had a difficult past. Tyler learned their story after 3 or 4 days of living next to the red-haired duo. Darrell, like Tyler, was raised in a village by his mother. He never knew his father. Although they lived impoverished, they did not starve, and there was always food in the house. Darrell's mother worked while he studied diligently. He was a good student with a dream to enroll in the college. He believed that people with high education were almost heaven's inhabitants. They have a good job, have a good car, live in a spacious apartment, and of course earn a lot of money. Darrell envisioned an apartment in a big city, a nice car, and trips to the sea. "You see, I wanted to take my mother to the sea," Darrell whispered confidently to Tyler. The lights in the room were already off, and the rhythmic snoring from the numerous hostile bunks filled the air. Little Jacob was asleep, curled up under his blanket, while Daryl and Tyler were talking about their lives. Daryl knew that his mother struggled to raise him alone, and he yearned to grow up quickly, stand on his own feet, and give her a fairy tale life. His mother had never been to the sea. She couldn't afford such trips, but Daryl knew she dreamed of it. She watched movies about the sea and lingered over photos of acquaintances on beach vacations. It seemed she even dreamed of the sea. Daryl eventually went to college and moved to the city to live in a dormitory, while his mother stayed in the village. His dreams were gradually more realistic. He learned that finding a job could be challenging, and a job with decent pay is even more challenging. However, Daryl was determined to succeed, inspired by others who fought for their place under the sun. As he grew older, he realized that success often required influence and money, which he, as a country boy, lacked. After college, he found a job in the municipal department for a small wage. Daryl, a fresh college graduate, was grateful for this opportunity. It was a better option than being unemployed. He rented a tiny apartment and gradually adjusted to his new life. His mother was proud of him for making a life in the city. She was the only one who believed in Daryl's bright future, and her faith kept him going. And then my mother died. Daryl lowered his head. Even in the semi-darkness, Tyler noticed that the man was struggling to hold back tears. It was clear the wound hadn't healed yet. Her heart, the doctors later told us, needed surgery long ago. But my mother, she thought it would pass. She kept taking pills, delaying her hospital visit. I know why. She feared they wouldn't let her go back to work. Sure, they'd allow sick leave, but during her treatment, they'd find a way to fire her. It's happened. They only want healthy young workers. My mother, she was afraid of being left without money. She had no one to rely on. I was hardly a protector or benefactor, barely able to make ends meet. I blamed myself for not being able to support my mother. I didn't have opportunity yet. The loss hit Daryl hard. The realization of what had happened came gradually. Tyler understood his hostile neighbor like no one else. Daryl's story seemed to transport him back to when he was suddenly left without his grandmother. I don't know what would have happened to me in the end, Daryl continued. Maybe I would have lived like a robot, or perhaps I would have done something stupid. So many thoughts were rushing in my head then. It's difficult to remember now. But then Abigail appeared in my life, and everything changed. I can't even explain how. She pulled me out of it. Abigail found work at the same office where Daryl worked. She was a sweet, modest girl with perpetually anxious grey eyes framed by fluffy eyelashes. And then one day, Daryl was rushing to a neighbouring office and collided with her and grabbed her by the shoulders, preventing her from falling. "Sorry," Daryl muttered, ready to continue on his way, and suddenly he looked into her eyes. Of course, Daryl had seen Abigail before, in the office, at work, at general meetings, in the canteen, even on the street. He saw her, but he didn't notice her. After his mother's death, everything around him seemed grey and unimpressive. But Abigail's eyes were like the bottomless lakes that were impossible to ignore. They were the kind, anxious eyes of a Disney cartoon reindeer, filled with so much concern and apprehension. Daryl suddenly found himself drawn to this girl who seemed strong, confident, and almost omnipotent. He yearned to be near her, to care for her, and to protect her from life's dangers. For the first time since a tragedy, he felt alive. They paused in the corridor, forgetting their respective destinations. Daryl apologized for bumping into her and smiled. Abigail assured him it was no big deal. One word led to another, resulting in a first date. This marked the beginning of their acquaintance. It soon became apparent that Abigail and Daryl had much in common. They were the same age, and at a young age, both were independently navigating the world. They had no one, no older relatives to guide them, no supportive mentors, and no close friends. Abigail had been raised in an orphanage, Her only knowledge of her parents was that they were alcoholics, a description shared by her caretaker. She was taken from her parents due to the risk they posed to her safety. Darryl and Abigail, once alone in the world, suddenly found each other. Their newfound companionship brought happiness to both of them. They didn't wait long to get married. Only a couple of months after meeting, they moved into a rented apartment together as a family. Darryl made their home cozier and more comfortable. He whitewashed the ceilings, painted the walls, fixed a persistent leaky faucet, and even replaced the wiring. Abigail, on the other hand, took care of Darryl. She prepared delicious meals, ironed his shirts, and always showed interest in his day. This made both of them feel important, loved, and no longer alone in the world. Their lives took on new, vibrant colours. Soon a wonderful event unfolded. Abigail announced that she was expecting a child. They hadn't planned for a child so soon, but the news brought joy to both of them. Of course, they also felt some apprehension. How would they manage a baby? They had no one to help or guide them, and would they have enough money to support a child? Despite these concerns, joyful emotions prevailed within the expecting parents. Darryl made a bold move. He resigned from his low-paying job and took up a position for a private company. It offered a much better salary, but also required more work. He had to study hard, grasp the intricacies of complex cases, and often stay late at the office. Abigail left her job, and settling into her new role at home, she focused on household chores and anticipating the arrival of her baby. When the boy's son was born, Abigail and Darryl were overjoyed. The baby resembled his father with his green eyes and red hair, and they named him Jacob. Raising a child was costly. Expenses like diapers, special food and clothing that Jacob quickly outgrew added up, not to mention the cost of medication, strollers, cribs and toys. Darryl worked tirelessly to ensure his family wanted for nothing. Everything was fine until, after much thought, Darryl and Abigail decided to apply for a mortgage. They planned to use the money from selling Darryl's inherited village house as a down payment. This was a risky move, but Darryl had a good salary, and as Jacob was growing older, Abigail planned to return to work. They believed the mortgage payments would be manageable and acceptable. Thus, their journey began. Initially, everything went smoothly. Buyers were found quickly, even though Darryl anticipated it would be a challenge. The money was used both for mortgage payments and repairs. Abigail and Darryl moved into a spacious two-bedroom apartment in a good neighbourhood. The repairs were completed quickly due to their available funds. They furnished the rooms with affordable modern furniture, hung beautiful curtains, and adorned the walls with framed photos of themselves and their son Jacob. Darryl fondly recalled their first New Year in the new place. They had just finished renovating. The rooms still held the scent of wallpaper glue and new furniture. Their apartment was beautiful, clean and cosy. A large Christmas tree, almost reaching the ceiling, stood in the corner of the living room. Little Jacob, in his adorable pyjamas, was entranced by the twinkling lights of the garlands wrapped around the tree. With the overhead lights turned off, the glow from the garlands and the flickering TV screen created a warm, almost magical atmosphere. Darryl looked at his wife and son, and their tastefully furnished apartment. The table was laden with delicious dishes, chicken with potatoes, salads, fruit, and of course champagne. What would New Year's Eve be without champagne? At that moment, Darryl felt blissfully content. His beloved family was nearby, and it seemed that things could only improve from there. Darryl was proud of himself. He had achieved what they had once thought was unattainable. On that peaceful, magical evening, the couple was unaware of the challenges that lay ahead. The following year marked the start of a new chapter. Jacob began kindergarten, and to the surprise of his parents, adapted to the preschool environment with ease. There were no tantrums or bouts of illnesses that typically concerned young parents. Meanwhile, Abigail found employment as a sales manager. With a large portion of the family's income going towards mortgage payments, the additional income was a welcome relief. However, by the fall, Abigail, who was still young and vibrant, began to experience dizziness, nausea, and a loss of appetite. Initially, both Darryl and Abigail suspected a pregnancy. In the women's consultation, they were informed that Abigail was not pregnant. However, her test results were concerning, and she was advised to consult a family doctor. The examinations took up a lot of time and effort. She had to leave work all the time, which of course her superiors did not like. During this period, his wife's eyes held a certain guilt, anxiety and confusion. Darryl's heart ached with pity each time he looked at her. He held on to the belief that everything would be okay. Maybe she was just lacking some vitamins or had a minor organ malfunction. He was confident that they would find the issue, treat it, and everything would return to normal. The diagnosis, however, came unexpectedly. A rare, presumably hereditary blood disorder. But the origin of the disease didn't matter. What mattered was that the treatment would be long, costly, and without any guaranteed success. The doctors, with brutal honesty, outlined the most likely scenario. Despite treatment, the disease would likely progress. Abigail reacted to her diagnosis with apparent strength, perhaps putting on a brave front for her husband and son. Darryl, in contrast, felt as if he'd been blindsided. He felt dazed, exhausted, and utterly disoriented for a long time. How could this be? Where did this misfortune come from? They had just started a new life, with numerous plans and wonderful ideas. Darryl eventually accepted the situation and began to take action. His first step was to find doctors experienced in treating patients like his wife. However, this was far from cheap. He had to sell some belongings, take out loans, and despite all this, the mortgage still needed to be paid. Darryl was working alone again. Abigail became extremely weak, and her treatment consumed most of her time. Their son Jacob was well behaved, becoming increasingly aware that his mother was sick and his father was working hard. He learned to take care of himself, prepare his clothes for the morning, make tea for himself and his mother, and make sandwiches. He was maturing quickly, and others began to use him as an example for their own children. But Darryl wished none of this ever happened. He wished his son were just like any other child his age, not knowing how to tie his shoelaces or cook an omelette. Abigail wasn't getting better with the treatment they could afford. The family was in debt, and all their efforts seemed to be in vain. Abigail was slowly fading, becoming a pale shadow of her former self. Darryl approached charitable foundations and sought consultations with eminent professors. Sometimes he succeeded in getting these consultations, but even these medical experts were at a loss. Abigail's disease was not well understood and was unpredictable. No one knew how to help her. Traditional treatment had almost no effect. Abigail was eventually taken to a hospital after being ill for approximately 3 years. She had become so weak that she could not even eat. Darryl, preparing for a long struggle, hired a nurse to provide extra care for his wife. However, none of this was needed. Abigail passed away a week after she was admitted to the hospital. Darryl faced the heartbreaking reality of his wife's death. The situation was worsened by the fact that he now had to explain to their son Jacob that his mother was gone. To add to his troubles, Darryl lost his job when the firm he worked at went bankrupt. The owner had always taken big risks for potential profits, and one miscalculation led to the firm's downfall. During Abigail's illness, the family had accumulated a lot of debt, and the mortgage payments were burdensome. Darryl found a new job that paid much less, but he had no other options yet. Darryl worked at his new office job during the day. In the evenings he took on additional work, unloading trucks at a store or assisting with repairs. Jacob was always able to occupy himself, despite being alone most of the time. He loved to draw, using pencils or paints and a sheet of paper to escape from his grey reality. His creations were full of bright rainbows, dense forests, and cute, big-eyed animals that didn't exist in real life. Darryl wasn't worried about Jacob going hungry, as long as there was bread, sausage, eggs, milk and frozen dumplings in the refrigerator. Jacob could manage meals on his own, even feeding his father after a long day of work. Their lifestyle continued until their apartment was seized by the bank due to unpaid debts, including an overdue mortgage and loans. Despite Darryl's efforts to fight for his property, it was to no avail. Ultimately, to avoid attracting attention from the guardianship authorities, they had to accept their fate. This led to Darryl and Jacob residing in a hostel. Tyler quickly befriended Darryl and his 6-year-old son, Jacob. He admired Darryl's hard work and Jacob's maturity. The three of them often dined together, and Tyler occasionally took Jacob for walks. Darryl worked long hours, and the dark hostel was a dull environment for a child. During their walks, Tyler and Jacob discussed various topics and shared personal stories. Tyler discovered that Jacob aspired to be an artist, but understood the need for education to achieve this goal. Jacob was aware his father lacked the resources to enroll him in art classes, which disheartened him. Nevertheless, he remained hopeful about the prospect of free classes. While Jacob eagerly awaited the start of school, Darryl dreaded it. He knew that their homeless situation would inevitably draw the attention of guardianship authorities. A child should have a home, a stable environment, and a bed of his own, while Jacob was living in a hostel and essentially wandering with his homeless father. Darryl feared that the authorities would take Jacob away and place him in an orphanage. Having heard from Abigail about life in an orphanage, Darren was determined to prevent this scenario for his own son. However, he felt powerless and lacked support, and in short, his situation felt desperate. Tyler winced. Whether from the biting wind or the sudden surge of thoughts and memories was unclear. The fall had been harsh, and he found himself longing for winter. He thought of the soon-to-come snow, which would make everything brighter, more graceful and softer. Tyler knew that little Jacob was eagerly awaiting the new year, the gifts, the festive meal, and making a wish. Despite his growing independence, Jacob was still a child at heart, genuinely believing that the wish made at the stroke of midnight would come true. Tyler knew exactly what he would ask from Santa Claus, or whoever else might listen. It was clear what Jacob wished for. He would ask for a good apartment for himself and his father, and an art school just for himself. It was a pity that neither of these wishes seemed likely to come true soon. Despite this, Tyler was determined to give Jacob something that would bring him joy. He had found a young artist's kit in a store. Expensive, but worth it for Jacob. It included a suitcase, an easel, a set of paints, pencils, and felt-tip pens. The thought of Jacob's eyes lighting up at the sight of this gift warmed Tyler's heart. There was nothing quite as satisfying as bringing joy to people, especially children. This miracle suitcase can only brighten a young boy's grey everyday life, but it can't solve all his and his father's problems. Tyler finally left the steps to the river and, reaching the embankment, rushed to work along the parapet. His boss, Jorge, valued his diligence and reliability, and Tyler didn't want to disappoint him. However, suddenly he noticed a crowd gathered around a lantern. Men, women, teenagers and children. They were having animated discussions. Some were making phone calls, and others were filming something on their phones. He followed their gazes to find the cause of the commotion. To his astonishment, in the dark waves of the broad river, about 30 meters from the shore, a human head appeared and disappeared. Someone was drowning, unable to muster any more strength. How did someone end up in the river at this season? However, Tyler didn't have time to think over it. Without a second thought, he ran to the water's edge, shedding his jacket, sweater and shoes along the way. These items would only weigh him down in the river's cold waves. Tyler was an excellent swimmer, having spent his childhood swimming and playing in the river near his village. By the age of 5 or 6, he felt as comfortable in the water as a fish. However, he had never swum in this weather, cold, windy, with a strong current. Nor had he ever rescued a drowning person. But he knew that if he didn't try to save this man, no one else would. He could imagine the desperation of the man in the water, surrounded by onlookers who were merely staring. Someone was calling for a rescue, but would they arrive in time? It was a matter of a minute. Tyler knew he had to at least try. The icy water stung Tyler's feet. He shivered, stepping forward, knowing the initial cold would give way to adaptation. And adapt he did. He was now bravely approaching the person who was drowning. Tyler's strength was vanishing, but he could see his target, a head with dark hair plastered to the face. It was a young girl. Her pale face and eyes were filled with desperation and horror. She was battling for her life with her last bit of strength. She must have been a skilled swimmer, otherwise she would have sunk long before. But Tyler knew that if he did not act quickly, she would still drown. Finally, he was close enough. He approached the girl from behind, remembering the crucial fact that a drowning person, in their desperation, can inadvertently drown their rescuer. So, he maintained a safe distance. He grabbed her by the scruff and pulled her towards the shore. Upon sensing help, the girl's first instinct was to cling to Tyler, but he did not yield. Gradually, she understood the situation, relaxed slightly, and allowed herself to be rescued. Already on the riverbank, with a silent look in the face of her rescuer, the poor girl fainted. People were waiting for them. Tyler was wrapped in a plaid and the girl was covered. The distant wail of an ambulance siren could be heard. The man looked around, realizing that everything would be all right. It was then that his hands started shaking, and his teeth began to chatter, either from the cold or the fear he had just experienced. At that time the paramedics arrived. An anxious tall man, dressed in an expensive jacket, came rushing from somewhere. He seemed to be the girl's father. Both of them shared similar features: hazel eyes, prominent noses, and defined cheekbones. Tyler didn't wait for the story to unfold. He dressed quickly and rushed to Jorge, confident that his boss would understand his tardiness once he explained the reason. However, it turned out that Jorge was late himself, so Tyler didn't have to justify his delay. 3 days later, Tyler was walking to the store to buy milk when suddenly he was called out. There was a man behind him who had familiar hazel eyes and was wearing a stylish jacket. Tyler immediately recognized him as the father of the girl he had rescued from the water. "I finally found you," the man said, smiling and extending his hand to Tyler. "It wasn't easy. My name is John Temple. I'm the father of the teenager you saved." "Hello," Tyler muttered. Tyler understood that this man wanted to thank him, but he was more interested in knowing how the girl was doing and why she was in the water. He had spent many days thinking about the girl he had rescued and hoped she was okay. "Thank goodness for social networks," the man continued. "Someone who was on the embankment that day posted a video. It clearly shows how you saved my Shelley. It was a brave and desperate act. There aren't many people like you around these days. We were lucky you were there." "How's the girl?" Tyler asked. As much as he appreciated John Temple's words, he felt a bit uneasy. "Shelley's fine. She's in a hospital now." "So she was hurt, after all." "Physically, she's almost fine. She's just a little cold. But that's not the point. Do you know how she ended up in the river? Did you witness that moment?" Tyler shook his head. "It was all due to unrequited love. She fell for a boy who began dating someone else. Shelley couldn't handle it, and now she's under the care of psychologists and is on the mend. Apparently she realised the magnitude of her mistake immediately in the icy water. But it was too late. If it hadn't been for you... The important thing is that she's okay now. Tyler smiled. It was just an impulsive act on her part. I believe this situation has taught her a lot. This situation has taught me a lot, admitted Mr. Temple. I've been in business for many years and had started to believe that there were no good, selfless people left in the world, like you. I had become cynical, cold, indifferent. Your act, it taught me a lot and made me reevaluate my values. Tyler nodded. What else could he say? I want to thank you. I can help you out. I know that you live in a hostel and don't have a place of your own. You are welcome to ask for anything you want. Anything at all. People like you deserve a better fate. Tyler paused, deep in thought. He remembered the worry in Daryl's eyes after receiving another notice from the guardianship authorities, and the way little Jacob spoke so passionately about his dream of becoming an artist. My life is fulfilling, Tyler finally admitted. But there's a young boy who could certainly use your assistance. Tyler! Jacob raced towards Tyler with the speed of a fighter jet. Grinning, the man opened his arms to catch the boy and twirl him around in celebration. Tyler, I won first place in the city's drawing contest. Remember the cosmos drawing I showed you? Of course I remember. I told you this would happen. Soon Daryl came up. They had decided to spend the sunny Sunday afternoon at the park. Jacob loved darting along the pavement, feeding the ducks at the pond, and observing the squirrels at play, while his father and his best friend Tyler were sitting at a nearby cafe, savouring coffee. More than a year had passed since Tyler's conversation with John Temple. The wealthy businessman was astounded by Tyler's request, as it wasn't for himself. He wanted to aid his friend, Daryl, who had a small child and was in a dire situation. John Temple purchased an apartment for Daryl. It was a one-bedroom flat in a new building, located in a good neighbourhood. Conveniently, there was a good school and an arts class nearby, where Daryl promptly enrolled Jacob. Jacob's talent blossomed dramatically, and his drawings became more refined and accurate, yet they retained their originality and spontaneity. Of course, John Temple could not help but do something for Tyler personally, although he did not ask him to do so. First, the businessman bought for Tyler an apartment next to Daryl and Jacob. Secondly, John Temple offered a high-paying job to the saviour of his daughter, hiring him as a gardener. Tyler, who always enjoyed gardening, found his place in this role. Initially, Shelley avoided the new gardener. She was likely afraid of the memories associated with him. However, they eventually became friends. Shelley regretted her act and, after some time, couldn't even explain to herself why she had made such a decision. Sometimes Tyler would look at Shelley, tall, thin and fragile, and his heart would tighten at the thought of what could have happened if he hadn't managed to pull her out of the water. While Daryl and Tyler were chatting sitting in the cafe, a petite woman with piercing blue eyes went inside and went straight to the men. There you are! I thought you'd wait for me at the fountain. Tyler turned around, smiled, and hurried towards her. They had only met recently, but it was clear that their relationship was serious. Today they had agreed to go out together as a merry, noisy company. It was going to be a wonderful day.